the depth and the fact that it's not really, there doesn't seem to be a huge spread when you talk about the talent kind of from top to bottom in terms of the guys that are going to be drafted, particularly say from end of round 1 into probably late round 3. There's a lot of similarity, which I think creates a great deal of unpredictability in this draft.
Yeah, the unpredictability as well, I think it just kind of carries over position by position, right? Because we used to go offensive line, receiver, and then we get excited maybe if somebody decides to go outside the box and take a linebacker or a defensive back.
Yeah.
I was going through doing mock drafts and all the rest in this, guys, and there were so many different players. I kept having to bump further and further and further down the list, Lapo, because you just know as you start going through it that, well, there's too many good guys at so many different positions. I got to keep pushing them down.
I think the interesting thing about this draft, and Farhan talked about off the top of the show, there was 8 players, Canadians, that have either were drafted or have signed substantial free agent contracts with the NFL. So what's going to happen? So there's some guys at the top of everybody's draft list, and they can draft early and get in and help them immediately. And then I think there's going to be a run on all those guys who are trying to make it down south, because I think there's going to be a certain amount of guys at the top that can help you this year. But after that, there's going to be a big run on those 8 guys.
And if you're betting on the selections in this draft, here's some advice. Never follow a Marsh mock draft.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not going to help. Let's take a look at the first round order in this year's draft. And this is a change. There's been no trades. Usually we've ripped up the script by now. All 9 teams are picking. They're picking with their regular selections. So a bit of normalcy. Usually things can get volatile at this time in the last couple of hours leading up to the draft. That's not happening, at least not with the #1 overall pick, which is being taken by the Ottawa Redblacks, followed by the Argos in Edmonton, Saskatchewan picking last. This is that time when I normally get to just talk to CFL Commissioner Stuart Johnson, but this year he was good enough to share the stage with CFLPA Executive Director David Mackey. David, thank you for joining us. And some news, the CFL playoffs are expanding. Stu, take us through the rationale for adding an additional round of playoffs.
Sure, absolutely. Look, we are so excited. The Grey Cup is the greatest championship in Canada. And we love that the road to it has now gotten a bit harder, a bit longer. We've created 9 playoff games versus the 5 that we've got now. We think that divisions have become even more important in the first round, with the top 2 teams playing each other in the divisional round off the bat. And the fight over the last month of the regular season is going to be fierce to get into those top 2, or at least get yourself home field advantage. We looked at the stats. We know that 80% of all wins come from the home team in the last 5 years in the playoffs. And really, when we talked to Dave and we brought this to the PA, we just said, this is about generating excitement and entertainment, and we've had unbelievable conversations looking forward to where we go.
Yeah, David, from a player perspective, you were able to get some input in this process. What does this mean to the players?
Yeah, I mean, it boiled down to, your career is short and winning is hard. And so when we had conversations, we actually had multiple conversations today with a lot of stars in the league, all of our reps, all of our board of directors, and it came to, it's more opportunities to play, more opportunities to win a Grey Cup, and then more opportunities to get paid. And that's really why they're playing the game.
Stu, the byproduct of all of this is the season starts earlier. There was a time when we would ask, is it June yet? Now is it Victoria Day yet? How does that impact things?
I think that we're excited by it for a couple of reasons. One, I went on a tour of all our markets, got to talk to a lot of fans and staff, players, and just to the general CFL community. One of the questions I asked was, hey, can you tell me, when does the CFL season start? And the most common answer I got was sometime in June. And from there I went Canada Day, some people said Labor Day. I think we got to plant a flag in the unofficial start of summer. We are the league of long weekends now. We're going to Victoria Day, everyone's going to understand. That's the tradition where the CFL season's going to start. We're going to run through all those long weekends, make events out of them. Of course, we've got Labor Day, and of course, we've got Thanksgiving to finish. It's about entertainment. It's about owning the summer and making events.
David, you've been through this. You got drafted. You heard your name called. What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's cool. It feels full circle today. So, Stu, I appreciate the invite. But it was awesome, and I've talked to a number of guys that are entering into this year's draft, and it's about enjoying the day. Right? I'm sure guys surround themselves with huge draft parties. Myself, it was a small, intimate. I was up north in Haliburton with my dad, my uncle, and my wife and my siblings, and it was an awesome day just to be with the people that put a ton of sacrifice into it for you. Right? Obviously, this day is about you. You get to enjoy it. I tell the guys, enjoy this day. You're about to be a rookie in training camp. So today, you get your name called, enjoy the excitement of it, spend it with loved ones. But it's an awesome day, and it's really everything you've put into this moment. It's the sacrifices your parents made, the sacrifices your friends and everyone you live with made, and ultimately the hard work you put in. So I hope these guys have a great day, and can't wait to hear whose name you call.
Yeah, Stu, let's start there. I know that it's been an interesting, exciting first year for you on the job. Please open the 2026 CFL Draft.
It has, thank you. And really, it is my honor to declare the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft open. Ottawa, you are on the clock.
Thank you, gentlemen. Let's take a look at the Red Blacks' projected Canadian starters. Again, these are our projections. They're not official from the coaching staff. There's still plenty of training camp battles to be won. And the name at the bottom of that list, A.J. Allen, who was a starter for that vaunted defense in Saskatchewan that took home the Grey Cup. He gives them an opportunity to change the ratio on the defensive side of the ball. You talk about 3 offensive linemen. And we didn't even talk about Luigi Villain, who's just been added from a couple of seasons in the NFL, and the impact he's going to make and the flexibility he gives Sean Burke tonight. So what are you expecting from Ottawa?
Yeah, it's funny because if you had asked me at the start of this offseason, you look at Ottawa and I kind of felt like this is a team that needs skill guys, right? They didn't necessarily get a lot of plays from non-linemen on their defense or necessarily their offense, right? Keelan White was a rookie. Daniel Adeboboye was a part-time guy on offense. That I would have said that they go skill guy. You look at their roster, they're a team that wants to start, we think, 3 Canadian offensive linemen. They have 6 veterans for those spots. I thought they might move, to try and get a skill guy on defense, basically. But then they go out in the offseason, you add an A.J. Allen, big-time playmaker for Saskatchewan last year. You add Luigi Villain, a guy who will contribute to that pass rush and make some plays. That it throws it up in the air for me a little bit because they have some depth at multiple positions now.
And, Dwayne, this is the draft of Ottawa talent, right? Like every single player, it seems, on defense is from Ottawa. So I wonder if Ottawa just starts to go, well, why don't we just start to build a monster of homegrown talent of all of these guys that can make their way back to the nation's capital and be studs at defensive line, linebacker, defensive back, because there's so many different players here. But I agree with you on the skill position stuff. I wonder at receiver whether or not that's the right play, just because when you invest 2nd overall in Nick Mardner and you go 3rd overall with Keelan White last year, and then you start to see some development, like 46 catches on 67 targets for Keelan White. That's good momentum. Well, maybe we backfill that and start to build from there. There's never a bad idea, as you say when we're on the broadcast together during the CFL season, put money in the bank, you never go broke. Well, you can always invest in offensive line, but maybe they want to go elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think what's important is the return of a couple of guys. Alonzo Adai gets back. That's a great get for him. You mentioned Nick Mardner. We projected 1 starter for the Ottawa Red Blacks, but with how Keelan White played and Nick Mardner, they could actually start 2 Canadian receivers. An area I think would be smart is, offensive linemen are really expensive. Can you get an offensive lineman right here and make yourself protected for next year and a guy who can play quickly?
The last time Ottawa had the first pick in the draft was 4 years ago. They took an offensive lineman with that pick. Let's see what they do when we come back. Sean Burke and Ryan Dinwiddie make their first selection together in charge of the Red Blacks. Here's a look at Ottawa's history in the first round, at least their last 5 years. We talked about Keelan White, who earned a starting position as a rookie. Nick Mardner before that. We mentioned Dante Bull, Zach Pelahos, who's starting on their offensive line likely this season, and Deshaun Stevens. And with the Red Blacks' first overall pick in the 2026 Canadian College Draft, here is the commissioner.
With the first pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Ottawa Red Blacks select, avec le premier choix du repêchage 26 de la LCF, le Rouge et Noir repêche Giordano Vaccaro, offensive lineman, Purdue.
There it is. They go offensive line. Gio Vaccaro, who spent the last season at Purdue after absolutely dominating in U Sports at the University of Manitoba. Many view this guy as a plug-and-play interior player, Dwayne.
Yeah, and this is interesting because I think a lot of people may look at Gio Vaccaro and think, well, he didn't play much at Purdue. Well, no, he didn't. In his one and only season there, as you get a look at him putting on that Red Blacks hat at his rather massive draft party, by the way, in Winnipeg, Manitoba. But this is a guy who played a ton, and as you alluded to, Farhan, played at a high level at the University of Manitoba. Started at tackle as a freshman and very quickly established himself as one of the best linemen in the country, eventually named the best lineman, the Metros Award trophy winner in his 3rd season at U of M.
Hey, the CFC prospect game works, I guess.
There you go.
There's a pipeline that's going there. But yeah, it's wonderful to see the family being able to interact with him and celebrate this moment. What an accomplishment for a guy to make his way through U Sports and then land at Purdue, obviously. But keep in mind, this pick is being made for his time in that uniform, not in the Purdue uniform, because he didn't get a huge opportunity when he went south. What he did, though, is take all of his accomplishments and acumen and sharpen it and refine it. And the biggest thing, honestly, guys, he went down there and he got the advantage of NCAA Division I facilities to train and to eat and to focus on becoming the player he's going to be in the Canadian Football League. That's why he went south. It wasn't to become this stud that's got all these first-round NFL draft opportunities. No, this was all about getting ready for this moment. So congratulations to Giordano.
Yeah, and if you want a physical football player, this is what you get right here. Like Gio's film is outstanding. Physicality, you need, when you play inside, you got to move defensive linemen off their spot. He does that. Like you said, the 2024 tape was amazing watching this football player. And again, so now you get somebody, Zach Pelios for the Red Blacks has been on and off the roster because of injuries, so you get protection there. They got Gregor McKellar, who's been on and off. They now bring a guy into the building who can step in, and he certainly did a lot of work at Purdue working on being a center. So now you got a guy who can possibly play center and guard, physical football player. And again, you're always trying to say, early in the draft, I got a plug-and-play guy that can help me in case there's an injury to one of my starters. Can he be right in the mix?
Gio tells us that former Manitoba head coach Brian Dobie was a massive influence in his life. Generally, if Brian's influencing your life, you're doing a lot of listening. Here he is right now with our Danielle Bain.
Thanks a lot, guys. Gio, you just went first overall to the Ottawa Red Blacks. Take us through the emotion and what you were feeling.
Yeah, it was super surreal. I mean, it was probably the best phone call of my whole entire life. And then having the opportunity to share it in front of my 300 new Red Black fans, it was just totally amazing and surreal.
You wanted to be in Winnipeg for this moment, to be with the people who have been on the journey with you. Yeah. What does it mean to you to share that with them tonight?
Yeah, I mean, every person in this room means something to me and a part of my journey. I mean, if you had let me in for a meal, or you're a head coach or a position coach, or ultimately just someone who supported me along the way, it means a lot to me to have them all around me.
You recently said that if you did get picked first overall, that there may be some pressure, but that pressure is a privilege. What do you want Red Blacks fans to know about the person and the athlete that they're getting?
Yeah, I mean, they got a humble guy. They got a guy who's ready to come in and work. They got a guy who's a mauler and ready to go play day one.
Thanks so much. Congrats and enjoy the night.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Danielle. Again, congrats to Gio. Congrats to his entire family. And guys, we had a chance to talk to him during the Combine, and he didn't necessarily do a lot. He'd already kind of made his statement during the evaluation process, but we did get a chance to interview him and spend some time with him. What a fantastic young man. This guy's going to develop into a leader. He loves the Canadian Football League, and I think he's going to be a part of it for some time.
Yeah, you absolutely got a sense, even just from that short interview, of the kind of individual he is. Very mature. Marshall talked about the decision as to why he went to Purdue. This was all about preparation. This was a business decision, and it has paid off.
I'll just say quickly that we saw the huge draft party going on there. Winnipeg has sold out the entire 2025 CFL season. I just looked it up. Friday night here on TSN, August 14th, it is Ottawa at Winnipeg. There's going to be a very distinct 300-person red group in the corner. So very excited to see that.
And the only true freshman ever to play for Brian Dobie. That's pretty amazing.
And he did get 30 snaps against national champion Indiana at the end of the season last year, and certainly held himself in high esteem there. Let's take a look at Toronto, who is up next right now. And we look at the arrival of Dakota Shepley after 5 seasons in the National Football League and what he's able to do to provide some roster flexibility there. It's a team that's lost a lot of quality Canadians in the last couple of years, Dwayne.
Yeah, and a big hit again this offseason with the departure of Dejan Brissett from their receiving core, right? You look at a little bit of the identity of the Toronto Argonauts, to me, was the production they got over the last few years, oftentimes starting 3 Canadian receivers. But they've done a nice job in the offseason when you look at creative signings. Dakota Shepley is a guy coming back from the NFL. Jonathan Kongbo is a guy looking for a bigger role. That they've done what they've had to do to fill Canadian spots and make up for that significant loss.
I think the East Division right now, you've got Hamilton, who won it last year, Montreal, who took the crown and went to the Grey Cup. You've got the Ottawa Red Blacks that are loading up right now through free agency, and now we've got the first overall pick coming in. Toronto's got to find their fit. Like, Toronto's got to find something that can make an impact relatively quickly.
Yeah, and that might have to be the receiver position. When you're starting two guys, you got to have a couple of guys in the building. And you know, Kevin Mattel's a really good player. David Unger is a good player, but you got to have depth behind him.
All right, let's send it over to the commissioner who's got the Argos' first pick.
With the second pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Toronto Argonauts select Nicholas Henning, offensive lineman, Queens.
A player who athletically absolutely wowed us at the Combine. Just the footwork that he's got, only 2 years along the offensive line.
Yeah, this is remarkable. Nick Henning, an All-Canadian as an H-back tight end, after attending the U Sports East-West Bowl, where you're in front of CFL scouts, etc., makes the decision to move to offensive line. This is a guy who doesn't project as an immediate starter, still raw, learning the offensive line position. But when you look at the offensive line group, this is one of the highest ceiling guys in this entire draft. Remarkable testing numbers, Marsh, when you look at his combine as an O-lineman.
Yeah, freaky numbers, and the athleticism is obvious when you watch any of the game film. He said that the principles of blocking are all the exact same from when he was an H-back, but obviously when you're an offensive lineman, you're dealing with bigger bodies, you're looking at different angles, different touch points. But what I love about this is that he basically said, yeah, I put on about 55 pounds worth of weight going H-back to offensive lineman. I didn't lose any athleticism. That is ridiculous to be able to pull that off. Any normal human being who puts 50-plus pounds on knows that. He stays athletic. His feet are still good. He ran a freaky fast 40. I believe he was the first sub-5 40-yard dash that we've seen since Jamal Campbell that came out, offensive lineman from York, way back almost a decade ago at this point. So happy for Nicholas Henning, man, because this is one of those great, unique journeys to the Canadian Football League.
And Dwayne, your point was he made the decision to go to offensive line. I think there was some help from some of his coaches. For all you guys who understand, like when you go in as a tight end, sometimes sooner or later they're going to move you to offensive line when you're big, athletic, and say put on 50 pounds. So athleticism, you need athleticism to play offensive line. I know size is important, but you got to also be athletic. What he's got to work on, there's a few things. Like his pass set's got to obviously keep developing. Using his hands can be better, but this is a very good football player that you may have to develop, like you said. He may not be ready if there's an injury to play week 3, week 4 like some other guys, but this is a long-term build. Jim Barker gets an offensive lineman that he can develop and hopefully become a starter down the road.
But high ceiling, right?
Yep.
Like arguably one of the highest ceilings in the entire draft. And to everybody out there who's watching this as a young kid, walked on at Queens.
Yes.
Like went from high school where nobody wanted to offer him anything, walks on, and he's the second overall pick in the Canadian Football League.
Yeah, he was actually hoping for a basketball tryout, said football wasn't that important to him at the time. It's definitely going to be important to him now, a potential starting tackle in Toronto. Meanwhile, in Edmonton, it was Ed Hervey and Mark Killam crew with a positive bounce back to the second half of last season, an important pick for them coming up as they look to add to their Canadian depth.
With the third pick in the 2025 CFL Draft, the Ottawa Red Blacks select Keelan White.
End zone toss, touchdown! Keelan White, his first CFL touchdown.
With the 5th pick in the 2024 CFL Draft, the Toronto Argonauts select Kevin Mittal.
Taking it off the helmet, Kevin Mittal.
With the 5th pick in the 2022 CFL Draft, the Calgary Stampeders select Jalen Philpott.
Oh my goodness! How did he hang on to that?
What a catch. Maybe the best of his career so far.
With the 9th pick, the Montreal Alouettes select Tyson Philpott.
Oh my goodness! Tyson Philpott has just made the catch of his life.
With the 7th pick, Saskatchewan Roughriders select Samuel Emilus.
Oh, are you kidding me, Emilus? That's filthy stuff! And an end zone! We did it!
Dave, one of the complicating factors for the CFL draft every year is the number of players that sign NFL contracts, either draft picks or undrafted free agents. This year, there are 8 of those players. How is that going to affect their selections here tonight?
Well, this is obviously goes up to every team, has a different take on that, what their risk tolerance is. Sometimes that will have to do with what their roster is. Sometimes they want to be willing to wait for a player a year or two and spend that pick. Other teams are saying, no, we need a guy in camp right now. But of the 8 players, 2 of them were drafted. Akeem Mesidor, the defensive lineman from Ottawa at the University of Miami, 22nd overall pick of the NFL draft. I would be surprised if he's taken in the CFL draft. The other drafted player, Logan Taylor, out of Boston College, Nova Scotia native, went in the 6th round. That's the kind of place where a team could spend a late round pick that he might come available sometime. I think very similar to Logan Taylor is Rene Conga, defensive lineman from Louisville, another Ottawa guy. He got $287,000 guaranteed by the Miami Dolphins. You're not going to see him for a few years. That's basically like a draft pick. And a little less, Albert Reese, offensive lineman from Mississippi State, Edmonton native. He got $125,000 guarantee. Won't push him back quite as far in the draft, but certainly will affect his draft stock significantly. Wesley Bailey, another Louisville guy, another Ottawa guy, got $35,000 from the Rams. Doesn't sound like a lot, but the Rams don't throw around a lot of free agent money at undrafted free agents, so that will affect his draft stock to, I think, a significant degree. And then you've got Malik Mega, Kevin Klein, and Rohan Jones, 3 players who got minimal signing bonuses. Look, we've seen guys that get minimal signing bonuses that hang around the NFL a long time, but the risk there is a little less, and I think you'll see those players probably go in the mid-rounds.
And if you want to compare what the numbers look like to recent history, a year ago in 2025, there were only 4 players that signed NFL contracts before the CFL draft. The year before that, there were 8, similar to this year. Now, the other complicating factor is there are 3 key players that are dealing with injuries. They probably aren't going to be ready for the start of the regular season. We'll see how that impacts their selection. So a lot for CFL GMs to consider before making their selections. The Edmonton Elks are up next. Let's take a look at their projected starting 7. But in the case of the Elks, they could start 9, 10. There is so much depth for them in Canadian. Look at that battle at center between Beard and Corte. Of course, Carter O'Donnell returned to the team a year ago. Joel DeBlanco was the #1 overall pick 2 years ago, earned a starting spot last year. It just gets better and deeper for the Edmonton Elks, guys.
Yeah, when you take a look at Edmonton, this is a team that in week 1 last year, their depth chart listed 11 Canadian starters. Now, that depth got tested by injuries over the course of the year. They made a change at quarterback, moving from Trey Ford to Cody Fajardo. Joel DeBlanco is a guy who wasn't in the starting lineup at the start of the year, came into the lineup. But the fact is, it demonstrated when you look at the way their season went, how important depth is, because by the end of the year with injuries, et cetera, you have a couple guys in Metier and Robbie Smith, guys suffer essentially season-ending injuries, but they still had the depth to have no issue starting a very good 7 Canadians.
Anything other than offensive line here, right? like honestly, they've got such an embarrassment of riches. This is the only spot I thought we might potentially see a trade for somebody who wanted to come up and go get an offensive lineman that you need, because you know Edmonton doesn't need that, but they might have other needs. And when we see Joel DeBlanco and the way that he has played, that encourages me when you stack that with DK Benum and some others, the idea of, okay, we got something special going here. Do we want to continue to build that momentum?
Yeah, you certainly have the depth to possibly go for somebody who may sign with another team. And then the biggest thing about, like you said, like last year when Ed Hervey took over this organization, there were not a lot of people left as signed as free agents. He went out and got his own people. This year he's done a really good job of re-signing of a lot of the people he loved in the building, brought in some Hamilton Tiger Cats in free agency, and now he's got the choice to take whoever he thinks is the best football player because of that Canadian depth.
The pick is in. Let's send it over to Stu Johnson.
With the 3rd pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Edmonton Elks select Daryl Jabome, linebacker, Rutgers.
There you have it. 47 games in his collegiate career, 192 total tackles. This guy was an absolute tackle machine as a captain and all Big Ten honorable mention for Rutgers. Dwayne?
Yeah, and we'll note, invited to Washington Commanders rookie mini camp. So not a contract signed. So this isn't necessarily the kind of thing that scares you off. But even with that little bit of hesitation, Edmonton, we talked about, is in a position with their Canadian depth where they can afford to make this pick early in the draft. I talked about Joel DeBlanco at middle linebacker, how that has become a starting Canadian position for them. They just provided themselves with a high level of insulation. The guy who was the consensus #1 linebacker in this draft.
And this was I was talking about off the top here, Dwayne, was the concept, the idea that you don't have to go necessarily into traditional places because the athletes are changing in front of us. We are seeing different players at different positions get better and better year over year. I love this one because of the 33-inch arms, the athleticism. You just saw it there in some of the clips we played, like the pop that he has when he actually gets to the football. That's going to create forced fumbles and turnovers. Can he play weak side linebacker? Can he play strong side? Can he back up to Blanco to start things in the middle? He can play all over the place.
Here's what I love about this pick is this kid slept in his car before a Rutgers Pro Day trying to get a scholarship. How great is that? Outstanding career. The one thing he saw on that card was 3 times he was an all Big Ten academic all-star. And if to play in a Rutgers defense is a very pro-style defensive set, he's going to be very catered to the CFL game. He'll be able to come in, use his intelligence, and this is what you call protecting your ratio. You just said it. You're starting a Canadian at the linebacker core. Now you put another player in that position, and now you don't have to start moving around your roster. You can just slap him in if there's an injury to DeBlanco. And again, the one thing for coaches to have an understanding of, a lot of the coaches think the mini camps, they usually expect those players to be available. So it's different than signing a guy or a guy getting drafted. Most of those players usually end up maybe in camp with you. So that's why it's a little bit of safer pick for Edmonton.
And among the many accolades we've talked about, he's also a semi-finalist for the William V. Campbell Trophy, which goes to the Canadian who best shows a combination of academics, leadership, and on-field performance. So this guy is well put together and can get it all done. Let's take a look at our next team up, which is Winnipeg, and their projected starters. We're not used to seeing them pick in the top 5. Patty Neufeld, the veteran, Tui Eli, you've got Gabe Wallace, so 2 of their 3 offensive linemen not getting any younger. Brady Oliveira, Nick Dembski, who've always had so much outstanding production from the offensive skill positions. They've added Tommy Neal, Reddick Cramdy. We're showing 8 potential starters there because Winnipeg has generally started 8. That's what they've done, especially since Cramdy established himself as a starter. So where do you go if you're Winnipeg?
Yeah, and I feel like I say the same thing about Winnipeg every year. This is a team that is very unique in the way that it uses its Canadians. The only team in the Canadian Football League whose leading rusher and leading receiver are Canadian. Almost 60% of their yards from scrimmage come from Canadians. No other team in the league, by the way, is over 40% when you talk about that category. And what it says to me is that Winnipeg is a team that puts no ceilings on their Canadians. They don't limit them by position or role. You know, and it speaks to a guy like Reddick Cramdy, the only Canadian who has been starting at the Sam or nickel linebacker spot in the league for a number of years, right? A couple of years ago, it was Terrell Ford kind of breaking the mold a little bit, starting at the corner position. Winnipeg is a team that is going to draft the best player available regardless of position, and they'll give that player a chance to compete at that position.
And what that says to me, Dwayne, is just that Kyle Walters and Mike O'Shea are at a point, because they are the longest tenured pair, that they are unafraid, right? It does not matter what you think or what I'm supposed to do or how I'm supposed to do it. If our football team can get better, that's exactly what they're going to do. They will pull the trigger at any position at any time in this entire night, not just their first pick here, because they know if they can grab somebody at an untraditional spot and make them into a player like Cramdy that you talk about that's been great for them based on projections when we were sitting here. I think that's the future of Winnipeg, is just being unafraid of taking risks.
And I think what's really good, we projected 2 starters at the receiving core. They still have Clarcius. They have Joey Corcoran they took last year to later round. They like, you got Tommy Neal in the building. You can start Nick Dempsey, Tommy Neal, and one of those other guys, because Brady Oliveira is going to get his Brady ball touches. So you could move it over to the receiver position and make sure that could free up opportunities for the offensive line to look differently than it's ever looked. So you're right. I think they'll find whoever they think's the best player who can help them right away and as an impact player, not an impact player, but somebody who can cap relief, someone be on the roster.
And one addition for them, it's not going to affect their starters right now, but this is a guy we've been waiting for before we get to the commissioner with the pick. I want to ask you, Mark, specifically about Taylor Elgersma finally getting signed and the importance of that. Yeah, some guy named Zach something or other, friend of the Kelseys. What do you see as a trajectory or a timeline? Or, what do you do if you're a coach and you got a player like that?
First of all, on behalf of all Canadian football lovers everywhere, thank you for coming home, Taylor. We appreciate you being here. We're very excited to have you. Welcome back. I love that he's in-house, and I love also that he gets to sit and learn in behind Zach Collaros. Like, that is an unbelievable situation for him to get better and better. For me, Taylor is the top end. If he continues to learn and he uses the fire that I watched him play with at Wilfrid Laurier, he could do absolutely anything.
Go ahead, Lapo.
The one thing I think is pretty interesting is 2012, I think one of my last draft picks of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, Jake Thomas, is now on the sideline as a D-line coach after a great career. Cam Lawson will probably try to take those spots, but great on Jake Thomas.
You want to talk about your great picks? Do you want to talk about any of them?
Not the bad ones, just the good ones.
Just the good ones. Let's send it over to the commissioner.
With the 4th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers select Noah Gatkuth, defensive lineman, Wake Forest.
Noah Gatkuth, who was ranked 12th by the CFL's Scouting Bureau. He entered the draft early this year due to some eligibility issues where he was at Wake Forest. A Cornish Trophy finalist, Dwayne. What's the ceiling? Because it seems like he is, of any position in this draft, there's not a bigger gap between the top guy and the rest than defensive line.
Yeah, I mean, because of circumstances, right? You've had guys taken out of the mix, particularly at defensive tackle in this draft. Under different circumstances, it could have been a very deep D-tackle draft. Rene Conga being one of those guys who's not going to provide immediate help because he's signed an NFL contract. So if you're looking to have a D-line rotation, you know, Lapo just talked, for example, about Jake Thomas. Jake Thomas and Cam Lawson played at that D-tackle spot. Well, now, really, if you want to add to the rotation, you're not taking a D-tackle in the first round of this draft. There's just not someone that fits that profile. But there is a defensive end who can fit into your rotation and help you a little bit with that ratio up front.
Yeah, I'm so excited for Noor because he's an Edmontonian to get a chance to go with Winnipeg to Edmonton because Edmonton just said, well, we'll just go with Daryl Givomi. We don't really need a defensive lineman. But the reality here for me is as much as he can swing around and play a variety of different positions, Noor Gatkuth, like Willie Jefferson is not going to play forever. You're going to get your opportunity at some point to take some major reps to pass rush. And I'm not trying to end Willie's career or any of the rest, but like he has been such a good player for such a long time. And we remember all the way back to the Anthony Bennett selection that feels like it was an eternity ago, but it was only back in 2023. And immediately on that one, I remember going, well, he's kind of undersized. He's like a speed guy off the edge. He's got an interesting build and play style, but I'm not sure it really matches what they're trying to do at that point with Jackson Jeffcoat. Since then, they've mixed in different players like Botters and all the rest with Willie J. Well, why not just go and get yourself a Canadian guy that might be able to anchor that spot, fill in for Willie, or play the other side?
Yeah, Reddick Ramsey is a solidified starter, but Cam Lawson's coming off injuries too. So you get yourself somebody who can create some depth at that D-line spot. Can he get 12 rotational plays throughout a game to give Willie a break and then eventually turn into a starter, like you said? And I think the most important thing here is this is the guy, like you guys said, on the defensive line. If you want somebody who can help you this year, I think if you don't make this pick early, you're not going to get him later in the draft, and there's a big drop-off after him.
Gatkuth, meanwhile, began his collegiate career at Colorado State, where he was a freshman All-American in 2023. Marsh, by the way, Willie called. He said he is playing forever. Hamilton is up next. Let's check in with Scott Milanovich, Orlando Steiner, and the rest of the Ticats as they look to have an outstanding season in 26. Let's take a look at Hamilton's projected starters, and you'll notice we're not talking about Devin Veresek or Coulter Woodmansey, who are no longer in Hamilton. In Veresek's case, they potentially get him back, but at this point, you look at where they're at. You've got 3 offensive linemen, 2 that are maybe getting a little bit older. Keandre Smith certainly has established himself. Curly Gittens Jr., Stavros Katsantonis are very good starter quality players as well, and then they'll have to figure out that last spot a little bit with a potential DI.
Yeah, and that's it. That's the thing that stands out to me about the Hamilton Tiger Cats is, with Devin Veresek taking a shot at the National Football League right now with the Indianapolis Colts, a team that has been right up against it in terms of trying to find and field 7 Canadian starters is up against it again. You notice Julian Hauser, an American, listed among the starters. He will be used as a DI. Hamilton has been a team that has been forced to kind of rely on that rule to fill their 7th Canadian starter spot. So to me, when I look at this team picking, in a perfect world, you're getting somebody who can step into your lineup and play as this season goes on, much as Devin Veresek did early last season when they needed that ratio relief.
It's likely unfair because it's the Canadian Football League and it is a team sport. But I just look at this as Bo Levi Mitchell's window. Like, how long is this window? You got to maximize Bo Levi Mitchell's championship window to go and get a Grey Cup in Hamilton. The drought has been forever. Can you get a player that can make a play for you sooner rather than later in order to honor what Bo Levi Mitchell has given you over the last 2 years?
And you can see how free agency factors into that. We had Bana and Hauser as rotating starters. That's why Kenny Onyeka came into the building. He's going to help Bob Dyson on his special teams. They've been together, but he's also maybe that guy can get 10 or 12 snaps at the defensive end position. Yes.
All right, the pick is in. Let's send it to the commissioner.
With the 5th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Hamilton Tiger Cats select Jonathan Dennis, offensive lineman, Louisiana Tech.
Jonathan Dennis, who moved to Miami at the age of 6. His father, his sister, extended family, they still live in Montreal. He says he loves the cold. He's going to get his fix of it in Hamilton.
Yes, he will. Jonathan Dennis, well-traveled in his college career, but has been on the big stage. Started off at Oregon, transferred to Miami. A couple of knee injuries led him to spend a year at D2 before bouncing back, playing his final season at Louisiana Tech. But this is a guy, along with Gio Vaccaro, who would project as the most ready to play amongst the offensive linemen in this draft class. And you know, adding depth at spots where the Hamilton Tiger Cats are already starting Canadians, those 3 interior offensive line positions, he's going to provide some depth there. But I guess basically the hope is that it at least ensures that if they suffer an injury there, they're not going to have to press the panic button. They have a guy who allows them to maintain the ratio spots.
Yeah, I thought they might have gone, like I say, with more of an impact spot, like whether it's backing up at receiver because you don't have a ton of depth in that. Keandre Smith has taken the next step in his career and has really started to evolve and become a primetime player. But, I mean, interior offensive line, yes, you add depth, but the 2 ACL tears back-to-back seasons like that, to me, that's a tough one, especially when you're picking up this high. If you're not going linebacker, maybe the drop-off is too much there after Jamomi goes earlier on here, that you don't want to go with an Eric Rasco or someone that can kind of back up and play somewhere in that weak side spot, because we know Wynton McManus now owns the middle after Devin Verisuck left for the NFL. So, but I mean, Dennis as a player, when he is healthy, he is a strong, on-point blocker that understands angles and has pretty good feet. So there's really nothing to be criticized here. You know, I'm wondering exactly what they're going to do with the ratio in the short-term future.
Yeah, I think, you know, this was a player that, you know, really highly touted, and then obviously the 2 ACL injuries. You know, and he, at times on film, he doesn't bend as well as you'd like him to bend. Maybe it's because of the ACL injuries, but it gives you somebody who has depth now. Chris Kolankowski, thank God they were able to pull him away from Winnipeg to become a starter, but that gives them enough depth that they can stay with the offensive line if he has to play early. And again, this is a guy you're going to get in your camp, right, where, you know, people have to make sure you can cover your bases this season for some spots.
It's been 4 years since his last ACL injury, so that does give some comfort to those teams. His medical's checked out. He talked to teams at the Combine, told them basically his knees feel better now than he did before the first ACL tear. So we'll see how that looks for him this season. Next up for us, it is the Calgary Stampeders, who after a year of missing the playoffs got back in a year ago. Here's a look at their projected starters, including Christina Canu, who started as a rookie 2 years ago. You've got Bryce Bell and Zach Williams. Jalen Philpott managed to stay healthy a year ago. He showed what he could do. 3 Canadians in that starting receiving corps, along with Adrian Green on the corner.
Yeah, and Calgary, a team that wasn't necessarily horribly busy in terms of shuffling the Canadian deck in the offseason. They add Dejan Brissett, which is a big get. But in terms of numbers of guys trading places, you know, Damian Alford leaves. Again, top pick from last year going to the NFL. So a lot of success for last year's top picks. But you bring in a Dejan Brissett, which is, you know, I think a terrific add in terms of their roster.
I think sometimes the hype around, you know, the top overall pick, and then he leaves, you go, well, we have to replace him right away. We got to go. That guy doesn't exist, I don't think, in this draft necessarily. That's that big average depth of target kind of player. So I don't think they're going to go with receiver in this spot. They've got your Jalen Philpott, Clark Barnes, Dejan Brissett coming in, as we say. Offensive line, potentially, but you're pretty deep in there as well. I'm not sure you need to throw another hat into the ring. So maybe they go defense here. I mean, the Stampeders typically don't do a whole lot on the defensive line. I don't see that one. They've already got a couple of picks that have played at a high level on the back end. Linebacker?
Yeah, and you remember Bryce Bell was injured last season and, missed most of the year. And what happened? You talked about Damian Alford drafted in the first round. And then all of a sudden in the 8th pick overall, we forget Chris Fortan was signed and played every game at offensive line, including the playoffs. So they drafted very well last year. Fortan filled in. So it'll be interesting. Maybe they are on the defensive side of the ball.
And 6 picks in, we still don't have a selection at receiver. We don't have a selection at defensive back, so there's some talent available at both of those spots. Here is the commissioner with the Stampeders pick.
With the 6th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Calgary Stampeders select Eric Rasko, linebacker, Angelo State.
This guy was a tackle machine at Division II Angelo State. His mom was born in Toronto, and while he was waiting for his qualification to be a Canadian in this draft, he spent the 25 season in the indoor league playing in San Antonio. So this guy's played pro ball. He might be pro ready.
Yeah, one of a couple of players in this draft who have already played professional football. But Eric Rasko stands out to me, quite honestly, as one of my favorite prospects in this draft for a number of reasons. There's a skill set that, when you watch him, translates so much to the Canadian Football League game, despite the fact that until the Combine, this guy had never set foot on a Canadian football field. Grew up playing his football in Texas, played his Division II college football there, played professional indoor football there. But it's also just the professionalism of Eric Rasko is something that stands out to me a little bit. Having the opportunity to talk to him, he knew he was going to basically have to wait a year to get into the draft. He's been in this process for a year, but did what he had to do to keep himself ready. That's why he played in the indoor league when that opportunity arose a year ago. Yeah, and the background on that, as you know, Dwayne, obviously for folks at home, is that he found out too late about the process, and hey, mom's from Toronto, so he couldn't get into the draft, and so he ends up here. Do you think he grew up saying, I want to play in the indoor football league? No. Why did he do it then? He did it because he needed to keep playing football so that he could be ready to get drafted and play in the Canadian Football League because he knew he was eligible and would be highly sought after. The thing I love about it is that he sees football defensively from a variety of different levels. And the reason I say that is that he started out as a defensive back. He's been coaching defensive line in the Dallas-Fort Worth area as well. And he's playing linebacker. He said that he's played in schemes like 4-2-5 and a 3-3 stack and all these confusing different alignments. And one of his teammates in the sit-down you had with him at the Combine said, I always thought you were blitzing. And he's like, no, I just recognize things fast and I just go. I find the answer and I just shoot the gap. So his eyes are great. And the biggest thing for me, Lapo, that convinces me he's going to be great on special teams right away in the CFL, he used the word tempo so many times in the conversation with you guys, because he said, I just kind of have to tempo running down the field. You can't just fly down there. You got to think about what you're doing while you're running down the field. He understands the CFL, and he's never even been here. So that's really impressive to me.
I think Dwayne hit the nail on the head on professionalism. When we interviewed him, the thing he kept talking about was like, hey, once I figured out that I'm going to be in the draft the next year, just like Dwayne said, like, what impressed me most is he said, I'm going to go play in the Indoor Football League. That was an amazing thing. Now, 20 tackles for loss in his career, so this kid has instincts. He can see things. He'll step in right away, play special teams, be a core 4 special teamer for him, and then continue to grow into more roles. We'll see.
26 years old, or at least he will be at the start of the season, or early in the season, I should say. So he's not a kid. He's probably ready to play sooner rather than later. And if you're wondering how Division II linebackers might fare in this league, just retired one, Adam Bighill, who was also a tackle machine at the Division II level. He began his career with the BC Lions. Their pick is up when we return. Here's a look at our best players available. We're not going to talk about that guy at number 1 because I don't think Akeem Messidor will visit Canada except during the offseason. Logan Taylor, late-round draft pick in the NFL. Renee Congo, Wesley Bailey, undrafted free agents, along with Albert Reese, Daryl Jabomi. We've seen he's got drafted already. Malcolm Bell, defensive back, still available. No defensive backs have been taken. Kevin Klein, an offensive lineman who signed in the NFL along with Darius Bell. Let's take a look at the Lions' projected starter. You might have heard of that guy at the top of the list there. BC needs to get better along the offensive line. They need some depth there at some point here. You've got 2 high-end receivers in Justin McInnes and Javon Catoy, and then Matthew Betts returned to form a year ago, and Jackson Finley has been a real find for this team with what they were able to get out of him coming out of the second round. He'll be a starting mainstay for this team for a long time. Happens to go to Western.
Well, he did. Right?
Yeah.
He's graduated.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. But you look at the BC Lions. This has been a star-studded team in terms of their Canadians, right? Nathan Rourke as the most outstanding player last year, most outstanding Canadian last year. Matthew Betts, collecting most outstanding defensive player awards. There you see a little bit of what they've done in terms of the awards over the last couple of years. Justin McInnes, by the way, over the last 2 seasons combined, the leading receiver in the Canadian Football League. Sean White, highest field goal rate. Like, their Canadians contribute. And so I think you're looking for an impact kind of player when you're the BC Lions. Again, yeah, you could use offensive line, but I think they look to hit a little bit more of a home run here.
We have entered the Nathan Rourke MOP window, okay? It is wide open. It's been smashed. The glass is gone. So Nathan Rourke needs some toys to play with. Justin McInnes is a great one. Keon Hatcher, exceptional at this point. He continues to do it. But when you look at how they share their targets around, like Aiden Eberhardt was very good for them last year. He moved in free agency, obviously, out to Ottawa. Now I'm wondering what the next part of that puzzle is going to be. If they go with receiver here, you can find yourself maybe a target that could get 20, 30, 40 targets based on those other 2 that you already have out in front going into this season.
And I think when, Dwayne, you talked about how well the Canadians have played at other spots, and also you have a Canadian quarterback, that allows the BC Lions to kind of say, hey, listen, we can play an American offensive lineman inside where other teams don't. So that allows them the flexibility to spend their money and say, hey, I'm going to put my money in one of the best defensive backs that's a national compared to, a backup Canadian offensive lineman. So the flexibility of those great players have made them be able to be flexible in what they're doing with their ratio.
The Lions pick is in. You saw Ryan Rigmaiden and Neil McAvoy laughing and high-fiving. I think they've got their man.
With the 7th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the BC Lions select Nathan de Montagnac, wide receiver, North Dakota.
Nate de Montagnac from North Dakota, the first Football North player in this draft, taken here in the first round by the Lions. And this guy really stood out during the on-field portion, the drills, the one-on-ones, all of that at the CFL Combine. And what's not necessarily a high-end receiving group, but a deep receiving group, he was the guy that really stood out on top.
Yeah, and Nate de Montagnac, the pride of Mississauga, Ontario, by the way, a guy who, really kind of made a jump in terms of production in his final year of college football at North Dakota. Not the biggest guy. He's about 185, 190 pounds at 6'2", but big catch radius. He's a guy who will go and get the football. A big play guy, big play mentality that I think is going to fit in very well with the BC Lions.
Took the words right out of my mouth, Wayne, because when you look at his size percentile, which is kind of height and weight divided by 2, he's actually below average. He's 46th percentile. When you look at his length percentile, which is height mixed with his arm length, he's in the 75th percentile. So you have a guy who's a little bit undersized, but just makes plays bigger than his frame. Yeah. And I think that's what you're going to see with the BC Lions. Crossing routes, all the rest. The other thing I love is that a lot of people make a big deal about receivers and their 40-yard time. I love looking at their acceleration from the 10 to the 20. And Nate de Montagnac was actually in the 88th percentile in terms of acceleration against all receivers dating back to 2000, which means he has burst.
How about North Dakota State? Scott Schultz, how about that name? Evan Hold, Quincy Vaughn, and Weston Dressler. We asked him, we're like, hey, did you know Weston Dressler went to North Dakota State? He's like, no, I didn't. And then I just all of a sudden saw him in the weight room, and I'm like, oh my God, I grew up watching him. It was pretty neat. Even Evan Holm, all those guys from North Dakota State. This is a solid physical receiver. Very strong hands to the football, and I think he might be big enough because when you watch him, he's not the biggest guy, but he plays with physicality. Can he be the guy that goes in? You need, when you play in one-back systems, somebody to come in and block a defensive end or on the inside zone play. He is certainly a good tool for them to develop as a really good receiver as a slot.
Can be involved in the return game. 4 years on the front line of KOR as well, kickoff return. Like, he's not afraid of specials. Again, for a guy who's not the biggest, but he's not afraid of contact. He's not afraid of being on special teams. So if you can get a receiver first round who can factor into your offense and you can use them immediately on your roster to develop and get them real reps, that's great.
And at 4.56, his 40 is faster than you think. By the way, Lapo, you mentioned all those University of North Dakota guys. You forgot, like, this Brady Oliveira dude.
Oh, I had him written down. I forgot that guy. Sorry, Brady.
Hey, Montreal is
Love dogs.
Montreal is up next. Let's take a look at their projected starters. You know, they got Tiger Shanks back last year, and that was a real boon for them to just kind of get that third potential Canadian starter there. We know how good Tyson Philpott is. Uguak getting him back from the NFL. Jonathan Sutherland getting him back. That's ratio changing for them, along with Isaac Adiami Berglund. Where does Montreal go now?
Well, I think when you look at Montreal, I mean, first of all, these guys have hit home runs with their early picks since the return of Danny Machocha. I think he and Jason Moss have done as good a job of anybody in terms of building their team with those early picks. Kind of largely set with depth at their starting positions on defense, even though they lose Dequoy. You know, Sutherland could potentially play there. Nate Beauchemin, who they picked in the second round last year, can step in and play there. They had Arthur Hamlin filling in last year as well. Maybe a little thin at receiver behind Tyson Philpott, that I wonder if that's where they look.
Yeah, I just want to make a point of, can we please appreciate how great they have picked? Since they've been in terrible spots, since a certain Johnny Football was a part of that, and there were picks that were traded all over. It was a mess when Danny Machocha got in there. He's cleaned it up, and he has just hit pick after pick after pick, and you can see it. I think Jeffrey Canton-Arcou is going to have an incredible year. They're going to feel the loss without having to quad there, as you say, but Jonathan Sutherland coming back is great. So perhaps they go defense just to try and backfill with what Canton-Arcou has to offer so they don't have to rotate that depth.
A couple of interesting things about this football team. 5 out of their 6 first-round picks played at U.S. schools. I thought that was an interesting thing. Tyson Philpott, the only one who didn't. What I love they did last year, Tiger Shanks ends up starting tackle the rest of the season down the stretch. They go get Sage Dockstader from Toronto to get them some depth there. So, yeah, they are covered on a lot of bases, allows them to take who they think the best player is.
Let's see who that best player is with the pick. Here's Commissioner Stu Johnson.
Avec le 8e choix du repêchage 2026 de la LCF, les Alouettes repêchent with the 8th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft. The Montreal Alouettes select Rohan Jones, tight end, Arkansas.
Our first future, so to speak, an undrafted free agent contract with the LA Rams for Rohan Jones, who does hail from Montreal. When might we see him, and what can this guy bring to the table when he gets here?
Yeah, and you never know necessarily when you're going to see him. Again, Montreal fortunate that they haven't had a lot of misses, haven't had a lot of departures from their team. They've got some depth, so they can wait for Rohan Jones to potentially find his way home to Montreal. But what they get is a guy who's got the full tight end skill set, but I'm going to say it like in a CFL context where you look at him as that fullback, H-back, tight end, all kind of as one position. This is as good a receiver as you are going to find at that spot, right? Like a big-time playmaker from that position. I would label this guy as, I talked about Eric Rasko as a pretty unique guy that I really like in this draft. Rohan Jones would be a guy on the offensive side of the football that to me is that kind of unicorn pick, a very unique guy. Not every team can take a player at this position early that may not play every down for you offensively, but Montreal can afford to, and I think they get I'm not going to say once in a lifetime, but a guy who doesn't show up in every draft.
Well, you always talk about a unicorn pick being in the first or second or third kind of pick. It's like they just got a pretty unicorn looking and acting body at a position that also is a bit of a unicorn. This is why I find this one interesting, is that it's a credit to what they have already done in the draft, that they don't have to go and get somebody to fill an immediate need because they have been able to massage their ratio the way they want. What I love about this is that I'm hoping, because a lot of the time, guys, when we're talking CFL Canadian Draft, we're saying, well, what is this pick? I'm hoping we look back 5-10 years from now and we say this pick was the start of teams using tight ends, fullbacks in more creative and imaginative ways, because I've said this in the lead up to this draft, the body types are becoming larger, more athletic, better hands, better route running. We are getting a wave of Canadians who are becoming very talented at playing true tight end, fullback. They don't have to be stuck in the inside slot. You can only block on inside run plays and all. No. The players are changing. It's time for the offenses to start changing with them. I'm hoping Rohan Jones, if and when he does come to the CFL, is the first of that
productivity at Maine, productivity at Montana State, and then obviously at Arkansas, some amazing stats at Arkansas. But this is why this is a safe pick, even if they have to wait for him. So he's a 4.7, 240. So, he may not end up eventually being the slot you need that can run by halfbacks or anything like that. But this guy will be a dynamic in-the-box football player that when you leak him out or put him on some corner routes on linebackers, he can run by people. And if he plays on your roster, people sometimes think, the most important thing for a player is that he's still on your roster 10 years later. That's a good pick. If this guy plays 10 years in the Canadian Football League as a fullback, that's a great thing. That's why I think this is a safe pick. This kid should play in the league a long time when they get him. Whether he's a slot, he'll definitely be a fullback, I think, if he can handle the in-the-box stuff.
Yeah, I think he can do a couple of different things. But, the thing I look at as well, in terms of Montreal waiting, they waited for Pierre-Olivier Lestage.
Yep.
East Division All-Star last year, has been their top lineman nominee a couple of times. They waited for Jonathan Sutherland a little bit longer, but he joins them now, too. So
Duquois went to the Packers as well.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Also,
Montreal has been down this road before and has had success doing it.
27.3 yards per catch last year. He also ran kicks back when he was at Montana State. Let's take a look at the Riders' war room. I know there are plenty of people in Saskatchewan still celebrating that Grey Cup win. Look at that smile on head coach Corey Mace, coach of the year. And let's take a look at his potential starters. Last year in the Grey Cup, they started 4 Canadian receivers and 1 offensive lineman. They've had some change at receiver. We know what happened with Joe. Tommy Neal left. Mitch Picton is out there. He's not part of that team currently. So Zach Fry potentially joins Logan Ferland. So as we look at this, high end in Kean Schaefer-Baker and Sam Emelis. So what are the needs for Saskatchewan right now?
Yeah, I think offensive line is obviously the thing that jumps out when you look at the Saskatchewan Roughriders. To some extent, you think about the uniqueness of their roster. The guy that jumps out at me in terms of that uniqueness is Tavon Campbell, right? A Canadian playing corner that you consider adding some depth, make sure that you've got guys that can fill that spot. Because you have to remember, in addition to losing what was a starting Canadian receiver from their Grey Cup lineup, they also lose a huge Canadian piece on defense in A.J. Allen, right? And so they need to make sure that the Canadian starting spots that they have are secure.
Do we think they need to go defense here? That's the question I had. Just because Corey Mason, I understand what he appreciates. If they want to go offensive line, you're probably looking at Darius Bell, maybe just Janvier at this point. But if it's defense and linebacker, Darius McKenzie maybe as a fit to try and work into the lineup where A.J. Allen was.
And, starting a couple Canadian receivers is their receiver, because they did lose Tommy Neal, right? They also, Mitchell Picton retired, right? So they lost some guys. I got Daniel Weeb, the Ken West Player of the Year, as a young guy, but and one guy who could start for them on defense, Ali Saad, I thought was an outstanding pick last year and played,
they just don't have a
well,
lot
but not much behind
him. Yeah, and got Kuth off the board.
Yep.
Tough to go D-line early.
Right.
Meanwhile, they're excited for tonight. This makes them that much closer to their Grey Cup champions. Here's the Rider watch party. The band is going.
Look at that.
They can't even hear us.
Nice.
Let's take a look at the last 5 years of first-round picks for Saskatchewan. You guys mentioned Ali Saad as a potential ratio option or a guy that should play a lot of defense this coming season. Kyle Hergel, who's now with the Chicago Bears, but a player that they could look for potentially getting down the road. Lake Corte Moore spent last season injured a fair bit, but certainly should provide some depth in that defensive rotation. Sam Emelis, we know all about him, and Nelson Lacombo should play extensively for Saskatchewan as well. The pick is in. Let's send it over to the commissioner.
With the 9th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Saskatchewan Roughriders select Malcolm Bell, defensive back, Michigan State.
40, you nailed it. So with Malcolm Bell here, in terms of solidifying that secondary and the ratio there with Tavon Campbell. This is a player who has started a lot of games at a high level, started all 12 games last year at Michigan State, 33 tackles, got his hands on a lot of footballs, began his career at UConn, and is a guy that with good arm length, he should be able to be a disruptive player.
Yeah, a guy trading the green and white of Michigan State for the green and white of the Saskatchewan Roughriders, pending, obviously, a visit to an NFL rookie mini camp. Malcolm Bell is a guy who I think offers you some flexibility in the secondary. I think he can play multiple different spots, not necessarily your head-hunting physical safety if that's where they were to line him up, but a guy who I think has pretty good instincts, can do a lot of different things, and a great commercial for the path of amateur football in this country and on our network, a former participant in the CanadaFootballChat.com prospects game.
Nice.
Also, yet another player from Football North.
Yeah, which is fantastic to see the Football North guys starting to come off the board more consistently here. I just twisting the knife, by the way, on the Montreal Alouettes after beating them in the Grey Cup and then deciding to go and get a Montreal guy. But great soccer background, tremendous feet, makes his way through UConn, goes to Michigan State, over 2,100 snaps played in his collegiate career. This is not somebody you're going to throw into a training camp if and when he arrives, or even halfway through the season if he comes back to Canada and say, well, we got to give him a month here to get his feet settled and figure out how this Canadian game is put. Like, this guy is rep after rep after rep after rep. He will settle in very, very quickly. He'll adjust to scheme as well. The length that you mentioned, Farhan, off the top, I think is what makes him kind of special, and just his instincts. Like any of these clips that you watch from Michigan State, just kind of floating around, whether it's zone man, otherwise, he just understands the game. He jumps routes. He understands pattern reading, all of that. So I think he's a really nice pick.
It starts with protecting your ratio. So Kenny's fill in for Devon Campbell. If injuries happen, 45 games, like you said, played. That's an amazing number in durability to play those many games. But 33-inch arms. So what you want as a defensive coordinator, you want to, like when you're playing man coverage and you go ahead, you want somebody who's got the surface area. When those wideouts try to catch the ball, you can knock the ball down. Like, you're leaving small areas for quarterbacks to locate the ball. That's why D coordinators like big defensive backs with long arms. So it allows them to be like blanket receivers, and it's very hard to put that ball on a spot when you got a guy with a 33-inch arm knocking the ball down. So really good pick here.
The first round is officially in the books. Malcolm Bell closes it out. The first DB off the board. Let's take a look at the first round. Gio Vaccaro, the offensive lineman, goes to Ottawa with the first overall pick. We loved watching his draft party in Winnipeg. Nicholas Henning, the converted receiver. 2 years as an offensive lineman. He is the second overall pick. Daryl Jabomi goes to Edmonton, a Canadian linebacker from Rutgers. Noor Gatkuth, the defensive end, potential replacement for Willie Jefferson. No, Willie's going to play forever. Goes number 4 overall to Winnipeg. Jonathan Dennis, offensive line, over to Hamilton. Eric Rasko, the linebacker, to Calgary. Nate DeMontenac, first receiver off the board. First Football North guy off the board goes to the BC Lions. Tight end Rohan Jones to Montreal, and Malcolm Bell just rounded out the first round. And before we start the second round, we do have a trade. We expected Ottawa to take the top pick here, but Winnipeg has traded up to the top of the second round. We'll get those details for you shortly. But as you know, we talked about Winnipeg's needs and what they were able to do with their first pick. There's some other needs there for this team, and a guy like Darius Bell still on the board right now in terms of maybe an offensive lineman that can play early.
Yeah, I mean, you have an opportunity to certainly add some depth at that spot after losing Chris Kolinkowski in free agency. Tui Eli, who has been their sixth O-lineman the last couple of years, has seen some snaps, moves into the starting lineup. But generally speaking, obviously, Pat Neufeld is the senior statesman, so to speak, of that offensive line group, that you want to make sure that you're adding some depth there. So it would not surprise me at all to see them go that way.
Yep. Absolutely, and it would be interesting to see, as we're talking about Willie and Noor Gatkuth getting taken, and then maybe they invest in the other side of the ball as well. But yeah, as we look at the second round here with Winnipeg being at the top with the 10th overall selection, Lapo, I mean, it looks as though they're going to get an opportunity to try and fill a position of need here pretty quickly.
Let me break down the trade for you. Winnipeg gets the 10th overall pick. Ottawa moves 3 spots back to Winnipeg's spot in 13. Ottawa also gets a second-round pick in next year's draft for moving back 3 spots. Lapo?
Well, and you're certain, I like you guys talking offensive line. They did lose Chris Kolinkowski last year, and Patty Neufeld, it came back. I think there's, he wanted to play another year, but like Patty Neufeld is one of the older interior guys in the league, still a great player, but how many more years do you have for him? Yeah. So, they're trying to figure out, hey, we traded up. There's somebody there that we like maybe at the O-line position. We'll see what they do.
And this is generally the portion of the draft where we start looking at some of these players that you might have to wait a bit for. And again, Akeem Messidor, I don't think he's going to get picked at all today. Certainly not before the 8th round. But you know, you've got some guys that are undrafted free agents. Those aren't necessarily locks, and you might want to wait here. We've got the pick. It's in. Let's send it over to Commissioner Johnson.
With the 10th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers select Dante Daniels, tight end, NC State.
So we've seen one tight end come off the board. We've got a second one right here in Dante Daniels at North Carolina State. You know, he's a player that began his first 3 seasons at the junior college level before getting the opportunity. What do you make of Dante Daniels? And he's a guy that doesn't have a free agent opportunity or anything like that. He's potentially available right away.
Yeah, and Dante Daniels is a guy that, you know, I had made a little list for myself in preparing for this draft of what I labeled as the most enigmatic players in this draft. And Dante Daniels is a guy, to me, who is certainly on that list. A guy who didn't attend the CFL Combine, 6'6", played at about 275 pounds in a kind of a double tight end system at North Carolina State, primarily used as a blocker. But, you know, I watched Dante Daniels, and while his pro day testing numbers were not very good, but you watch Dante Daniels, he can block. He moves pretty fluidly. He's an athlete. This is a guy who I think, you know, some people have talked about him possibly because of his size as being an offensive line guy. I don't think that's what he is. I think that what Dante Daniels is a true tight end, but I think he needs to play in the Canadian Football League probably 25 pounds lighter, and I think he can do that.
It reminds me a lot of the Braden Lennius conversation, but not necessarily the same. You know, is he a receiver? Is he a tight end H-back kind of thing? Is he a true inline tight end and run blocking for Brady Oliveira, where now they don't have to use a 6th offensive lineman? Or is he the 6th offensive lineman? Like, to me, that's what this begs the question of what does Winnipeg want to do moving forward? Because when Brady ball is being played, Lapo, you know you're going to run the rock. You get a big body like that, but then how do you use him? Because I'm with you, Dwayne. Like, the testing suggests that the athleticism, the fluidity is there, but the actual explosiveness downfield and making big plays. Like, I'm trying to imagine, you know, it's Labor Day. They're in Saskatchewan, and at tight end, you know, he's running a little 15-yard crossing route and catching a touchdown. I don't know if I see it. Like, I think it might be more of an offensive line situation where, okay, he adds variety to our offensive line package, but he's not necessarily that true inline guy. And I really don't think he's going to get any look at fullback type stuff because they need a true fullback. But as we all know, when you're coaching, you can change up the look of things in the alignment, tight end, fullback, otherwise, and get the same result.
Yeah, so there was times when, you know, when I was in Winnipeg, we used to use, you know, Mike Miller was our fullback because he was the best special teams player in the league, and we used him sparingly as a fullback. But the other times, what you would do is, like you guys talked about, you take one of your extra offensive linemen and you put him in on the ball and doing simple things that an offensive lineman would do. This kid's a little bit better athlete, you think, in that spot, so maybe they start using him like you're talking about in some of that Brady ball type plays, and then now you've got another guy who can maybe get you through a pinch, but it becomes basically another offensive lineman in your heavy run game.
Yeah, like when you look at Winnipeg's roster, and you know, we talk about the comings and goings. We mentioned Tuieli. Right? He was the guy playing tight end or sometimes even working in the backfield as a fullback, H-back, whatever you want to call him, as a 6th lineman. Well, now he's your starting center.
He's projected
right?
to start.
So there's a need. There's a reason why they traded up, and it wasn't to get someone they're not going to use.
6'6", 272 pounds, and 470 snaps at the Division I level. The Argos are next as the second round continues on TSN. The CFC Prospects game has become a staple of our football coverage here at TSN. Tonight, over the course of the draft, you will hear a number of players that played in that game, featuring so many of the top players in Canada. They're going to get their names called tonight. These 4 young men have been selected to play in that game. We'll start with offensive lineman Obina Uchite. Next to him is Stefan Potasic, a receiver from Football North. His father played at McMaster and is the current head coach there. We've also got Peter Odowu, a receiver from here nearby in Toronto, and then Andrew Colson, a quarterback, also at Football North. Obina, we'll start with you. You have never given up a sack in your high school football career going back to grade 9. I can see that. I can see why that might have happened, but you're going to get some challenges in this game. What do you hope to accomplish in the CFC Prospects game?
For me, like really just being on like the biggest screen of my life football-wise. As a lineman, we're always told to like set the tone and be aggressive and just kind of like be like the dogs on the field all the times. So that's like really like what I take pride in. Like I started taking football seriously like in grade 10. Like before then, like I didn't even know like what pancake was. So ever since, like I found out about everything, the aggressiveness to it. I loved it. I just wanted to like make sure like no one across from me beats me. Especially, I wouldn't want my quarterback getting hurt. I take pride in protecting my teammates, my boys, and everything. I just like to always be the winner.
Love it. And Steph, how about you? You've been around football your entire life. Your dad, as I mentioned, is the coach at McMaster. Your mother, Karen, used to work for us here at TSN as a producer. She's still involved in that industry. You've been around sports. But this is going to be a bit of a different experience for you at Football North. And Football North players have dominated the CFC game. We're going to hear a number of their names called at the draft tonight. What's it like to be a part of that program?
Yeah, as you said, I've been around football my entire life, and I'm so grateful to learn about the game my entire life and progress as a player and a person. And playing at Football North has only just helped that. I've played against elite competition, and I just can't wait to get out there on the 23rd and show all the hard work I've been putting in this offseason. And yeah, I can't wait.
Peter, you call yourself a football rookie still. You're fairly new to the game, but your physical traits have allowed you to have early success. What do you hope to show in Hamilton at the CFC game?
I'm open to go out there and be me. I want to be out there, be aggressive. I always want to set the tone as a player myself. Growing up, I've always been the kid to stand out and always want to be out there to show out and be the best and give it all my all. When I go there, I want to really go for the experience so I could really know where my level is compared to the elite players I'm playing against. I just want to go out there and just dominate. That's what I'm looking for.
And finally, Andrew, yourself, I mean, when you look at quarterbacks that come out of Football North, there are some high-end players. You've been prepared for this your entire life. Your dad is the offensive coordinator at Acadia. He played at Acadia, had a very successful career. What's that influence been like for you as you prepare for the next stage?
Yeah, I'd consider myself super lucky to be coached by all the great coaches I've had throughout my life, whether it's throughout my minor football career with my dad, and then now coming to Football North with Coach Shea, Coach Edgar, Coach Lalonde. They've all just taught me what it means to be a great quarterback on and off the field. And they taught me that it means so much more than just throwing on the field. It's everything in the classroom, in the weight room, with your teammates. So I'm just really excited to showcase my ability.
Gentlemen, thanks so much for doing this. Good luck in the game. It is the CFC Prospects game, May 23rd in Hamilton. Let's take a look at the Argos and their last 5 second-round picks, or over the last 5 years at least. Jared Wayne at receiver, Deontay Knight defensive line, Daniel Adetoboye, who's now in Ottawa, and then Sage Dockstetter, who's made his way to Montreal. Now with the pick, let's check in with the commissioner.
With the 11th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Toronto Argonauts select Isaiah Smith, running back, Guelph.
Isaiah Smith, clearly the consensus top running back on this board. Maybe the one guy that could play tailback and fullback amongst this crop, Dwayne.
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say, that versatility. You think about a couple of years ago, a guy like Michael Chris Ike, drafted by the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, a guy who can back up at a couple of spots. I think about Toronto's roster, and the last couple of years they've been a team because of the Canadians that they have had at other positions, say particularly at receiver, where they have consistently started 3. It's allowed them to dress a couple of American running backs. So they've dressed a backup American running back. The roster may shift a little bit this year where they require a Canadian backup to play. And, the market of those guys in the league, when you think about the offseason, things that have gone on in the offseason, Sean Thomas Erlington retires in Montreal, Jeshurun Antwi retires in Calgary. The depth of Canadian running backs and those guys who can sort of get you through a game, play a certain number of snaps and spelling your starter is limited. And so your best route to get that guy is Isaiah Smith, quite frankly, because there aren't a lot of other guys in this draft class that necessarily project to that.
Yeah, exactly. And he benefits from being part of a draft class that doesn't have, necessarily a marquee kind of pushing for that top running back taken sitting there right behind him, right? That's I think why he goes in this spot. But to me, it's the Toronto Argonauts trying to find solutions, right? Like I mentioned off the top, they've got to be able to find some different ways to massage the ratio. And the picture that we showed you off the top here, like this, Isaiah Smith is chiseled. Like he will run through an absolute brick wall. He's 230 pounds. He moves very, very well. I think he's got a great opportunity. Like you say, that it's kind of that Antwi fill-in role that Sean Thomas Erlington. I also think about just how the former Toronto Argonaut, Daniel Adebaboye, spelled William Stanback at times last year and was really successful. And the reality in the CFL is, guys, that if you are a backup running back as a Canadian and you get your 10, 15, 20 snaps and you play very well in them and you're productive, there's an opportunity in free agency. You get picked up by somebody and you're being looked at as a fringe starter with an opportunity to play even more reps. So I think that's what Isaiah Smith's kind of trajectory is at this point.
Yeah, a couple things about Isaiah Smith is, you know, at 230 pounds that he was at the combine, you know, and running the 4.67, this is kind of somebody, a special teams player, going to go, let's give this guy an opportunity to do some things that normally some of the smaller, faster tailbacks, like, you know, sometimes guys run 4.67, but they're not 230 pounds. So that's a positive for him. And it certainly gives you a guy. Think about last year. We didn't know too much about Matthew Peterson until Brady Oliveira went down. And Peterson go ahead and does some really good things. And what the Bombers do, we're going to play a Canadian tailback. So this gives you somebody who can maybe give you that roster flexibility that you need.
A couple of other notes about Isaiah Smith. I spoke to his head coach at Guelph, Mark Surya, who told me he suffered a torn ACL in his second year, and when he came back, he wasn't necessarily as comfortable running with the football, so he worked on other parts of his game. He got better out of the backfield. He got better in direct pass protection from the backfield, chipping, coming out of the backfield, and all of that allowed him to become the complete player that he is today. In addition, he's very academically driven. He's a human kinetics major, and he told teams that if he's not on a roster, he's going to go back to school. So we'll see what that looks like after training camp. Meanwhile, Mark Killam and the Edmonton Elks, we've talked about their plenty of riches as far as their Canadian depth is concerned. They've already gone linebacker in the first round. Let's see what they do here with their next pick. Again, a team that's got plenty of flexibility.
Yeah, I mean, so true about Edmonton. This is a team that we anticipate starting maybe a couple of spots above the required 7 Canadian spots. So a team that's in a position to kind of go, who do you think is the best player at this point? And particularly, who do you think is the best player at a position where we start a Canadian to ensure that, you know, I think Lapo mentioned it as we talked about Edmonton in the first round, so that you don't have to change your roster. You don't have to change multiple positions because of one injury, essentially, that you can plug in Canadian for Canadian.
They went linebacker earlier on. Offensive line looks good. I'm starting to think, well, defensive back, yeah, you could go get like a Jet Elad or somebody like that maybe, but I would love if they were to go Jesse Leome Ojutalayo right now. Like Wilfred Laurie, just a chiseled guy that Mark Killam looks at on special teams and can do anything that you want and find a way to learn in behind some of your Canadian receivers. I would love that.
You know, I'm kind of looking at their roster, and here's a couple of names that are added to this organization. Noah Curtis was injured in training camp last year, didn't even play defensive lineman, and they get Daryl Newell, who, you know, sat out last season. So there's 2 more names that can give them some depth at the defensive line position. So they are loaded. So I'm sure they can pick who they think is the best player.
All right, the pick is in. Let's send it to Stu Johnson to see what Edmonton's going to do here in the second round.
With the 12th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Edmonton Elks select Benjamin Sangmua, defensive back, UBC.
Benjamin Sangmua, the first UBC player off the board. He's got a minicamp invite with the Indianapolis Colts. Born in Ghana, he's only been playing football for 5 years, so there's a ceiling yet to be achieved here, Dwayne.
Yeah, kind of crazy. I mean, this is a guy who was, ironically, moves from Ghana and plays rep hockey before he finds his way on the football field. You know, yeah, I mean, what a cliche, right? But this is a guy who was finally going to play high school football, but it was the COVID year. There's no high school football. He ends up doing a prep year at Football North in Mississauga. Things go well for him. Gets a lot of attention, finds his way to UBC. This is a guy who's attracted some National Football League attention, a defensive back with some length, plays on the corner. We talked about adding depth at positions where you already start Canadians. And sometimes it can be tougher to find depth at linebacker, where they went first round Jabome to fit in behind DeBlanco. They've got Terrell Ford starting at corner. Well, now you've got another Canadian who theoretically provides some depth behind him to sort of secure that spot.
And hand-timed 40-yard dashes at pro days being what they are, take them for what they are, still at 4.5, right? Like, and I mean, that's pretty impressive for a guy with his size. The length, to me, is really impressive as well. I like the fact that like when Tyrell Ford was coming out, we were just in awe of the athleticism, the physicality, and the raw skills, and the ball hawkness. And this is not the type of player that Tyrell Ford was necessarily in terms of game-changing plays, but it's a guy that can actually lower the boom for you. And Tyrell, a couple of times, has been caught out where, you know, he's kind of watching and seeing players that blow past him on the sidelines, and then he has to catch up. But to me, Sangmo is a guy that's going to stick his head in a little bit if he has to play. And I think that's what you want in a depth backup in a defensive back position, somebody who's not going to shy away from contact, and he doesn't.
Yeah, sometimes it's pretty hard to evaluate some of the U Sports defensive backs sometimes because is this guy, where are we going to move him to position-wise, first and foremost? And then sometimes the ball's not going to where they need to be. But, you know, the film shows that this kid, he'll come up and strike you. He's physical, 200 pounds. There's a lot to like, and that puts you in a position where, hey, we're going to leave him. Can he be a backup to some of the starters? And then put him on special teams, let him do his thing. But you didn't have to worry about this kid's physicality. He was going to come up. He was going to make some plays, and you like seeing that, and you know that's going to hopefully translate into special teams.
He played 3 different positions at UBC, including nickel this past season. Sky's the limit when he settles into a spot. Ottawa made the trade to drop back 3 spots in the second round. They'll make that pick when we return. Let's take a look at the last 5 years' worth of second-round picks for Ottawa. There's been a few of them, including Daniel Okpoko, defensive lineman. We also see James Peters at linebacker. Alonzo Adai, who they're going to be able to reap the rewards of that going forward. So let's see what they do now. Here's the commissioner with Ottawa's second-round pick.
With the 13th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Ottawa Red Blacks select, avec le 13e choix du repêchage 2026 de la LCF, le Rouge et Noir repêche Émeric Boutin, fullback, Laval.
Two-time first-team All-Canadian, 24 receptions for close to 400 yards and 3 touchdowns the last couple of seasons. Tell us a bit about him.
Yeah, this is a guy who moved from being a true receiver into that tight end H-back role. And, you know, we see a little bit of a run on these guys, right? And many years in the coming, basically. But with Dante Daniels going earlier in this round, Rohan Jones off the board a little bit earlier, comes out of the Laval program, which is going to draw automatic comparisons to David Dallaire. He's a little different than Dallaire, not necessarily as physical, but more of a true receiver in that spot, but certainly a guy who's not afraid of the physicality, you know, and again, filling a need, part of a little bit of run on this body type, this sort of player.
Congratulations to the Laval Rouge et Or, now 24 straight years of having a CFL draft selection, which is incredible, but also just congratulations on having a fullback drafted from Laval. That never happened. Never. That's the first time that's happened. I mean, there's a reason for it, though, right? Like we talk about Nicholas Henning at Queens, the fact it's H-back, and then offensive line, the skill set kind of transitions. Well, at Laval, it's like if you're a slot back, if you're a true tight end, if you're a fullback, if you're a 6th offensive lineman, you're learning how to block properly. Like the coaching there is so sound that it doesn't matter what position you're playing. So Émeric Boutin, the thing that I loved was he said in his sit down at the Combine, 2022 Vanier Cup, it felt empty because he was watching from the sidelines. And so Dwayne, you asked, what is your favorite moment in your time with the Rouge et Or? And he said the 2024 Vanier Cup, because 2022 bothered me that I didn't get to contribute. All this guy wants to do is to be on a team and to make a difference, and he'll get that opportunity now.
Yeah, and at 230 pounds, he ran a 4.76 at the Combine, so you didn't go, wow, this guy's an amazing speed, but he will fit very well if he embraces the physicality of the position inside. Like, as you said, he moved in from the slot position. He embraces the physicality. He'll play a long time in the league. Ottawa has Anthony Gosling is 33 years old on their roster as a fullback. Marco Dubois is a 30-year-old fullback taken in the second round from Laval. Marco is probably a little bit more true receiver that moved into fullback, but this gives you a guy that once again can eventually become your starting fullback if he embraces the physicality position, because he's really good around the box when you release him out in routes, and he's faster than his 40 time shows up when you watch him on tape.
Yeah. Coached by former NFLer Anthony Auclair, so he knows how to play that part of things. And
former what?
Former
and current.
Canada football.
Oh, one of your guys. That's right.
Yes, jeez.
Oh, I was wondering when we were going to get into that.
Roster?
I thought we'd wait until the online portion, but no, we had to get it in right here. Paul Lapalisse, everybody. Second round picks for Hamilton the last 5 years. Isaiah Banya, defensive lineman who should contribute this coming season. Luke Brubaker, Anthony Federico, Dean Leonard amongst their top picks. No second round pick in 23. And with their pick, let's check in with Commissioner Stu Johnson.
With the 14th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Hamilton Tiger Cats select Malik Mega, wide receiver, Coastal Carolina.
Undrafted free agent contract with the Carolina Panthers after a breakout senior season and a very good pro day where he ran a 4.43. This guy has been playing at the collegiate level for some time here, Dwayne.
Yeah, he has started out his career at Penn State University, a special teams captain at Penn State. And this is one of the things about this draft. You mentioned Jesulayomi Ojulatayo a little bit earlier, terrific special teams player, receiver from Wilfrid Laurier University. Malik Mega, another receiver, great special teams player. Nolan Ulm, receiver, great special teams player. When so often the question is asked of receivers, well, if they're not starting, can they play special teams? These guys can sure play special teams. And if Malik Mega develops as a receiver, I mean, the nickname Megatron is just waiting.
Right.
Yeah, there it is.
Not an absolute freak athlete. I'll give a shout out to my buddy Mo Khan, who has been telling me about Malik Mega since his CEGEP days, about his speed, about the recruiting process with him and so on. Fascinating guy in terms of his background, but you know, a still developing guy with a very high ceiling given his athleticism.
He shook our hand at the CFL Combine when he came over, Dwayne, and gave me the old Adrian Peterson wrap around the hand. I'm like, okay, yeah, I see where we're going with this. But yeah, I mean, his background is born in the Ivory Coast, lives there for 6 years, right, and then goes to Italy for 4 years. He speaks Italian, French, and Spanish. Get ready to speak hammer, okay? Because this guy is going to fit in so well. The fans there are going to absolutely love him. This just has fan favorite written all over it in a couple of years if he continues to work and develop, because he's got great feet and he loves relying on his speed. He can be that down the field target as a young guy that's relatively low contract, all the rest, but once he actually gets into the open field, he can really, really start to separate. And I think that's what you need to see. Is that the Christian Vaillant?
Yeah, Canadian to Canadian touchdown pass there, by the way, for Penn State.
Love that.
You know, what I would say is I think was interesting about Malik, sometimes you have these guys that are really great athletes and you're not sure they haven't played and why didn't the guy play? I know the one thing I know about this guy is he speaks, like you said, 5 languages. When we interviewed him, I thought he was an exceptional young man. And, you know, I don't know why he didn't play a lot, but I do know he runs a 4.4 and he's a big target that I think he can play X. I think he can be a boundary number 1 and you run by people and you can get out of breaks for comebacks. And not a lot of guys can do that right off the bat. I think he can do that. But right out of high school, he was a core 4 special teamer at Penn State, and he was the MVP of their, of their special teams. So this is a guy, like you said, that can step in if he plays special teams for a long time, and he's an emergency receiver for you, great. Or he might be a starting X down the road.
Had 18 offers coming out of high school, chose Penn State because of the number of Canadians that were there. You mentioned Vaillant at the time, Jonathan Sutherland, Theo Johnson, and so many others. Let's check in with the BC Lions as they make their second round pick. A few years back, they picked some guy named Rourke. He's doing pretty well for them right now in the second round. Let's take a look at the Lions' second round history. Hayden Harris, who joined the team late last season and should be part of their rotation this year. Jackson Finley, what a breakout year he had last year as a rookie. Should be a mainstay in the secondary for them for years to come. Theo Benedette, who's in the NFL right now, along with a few others there. Bagiogo, Zur, Alaric Jackson, who's in the NFL as well. And with the second round pick of the BC Lions, here is the commissioner.
With the 15th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the BC Lions select Jet Elad, defensive back, Rutgers.
Jet Elad has played a lot of football in the last 7 seasons at the collegiate level, 61 games, hernia injury in December. Probably isn't going to be ready until maybe August, maybe July, but once he gets here, he could be an impact guy.
Yeah, he could, and 7 seasons, yes, the distinction, I guess, of probably the longest college career of any player in this draft. Started off at Ohio University, spent a year in junior college, then on to UNLV, eventually transferring to finish up at Rutgers. And a guy who, over the course of his career, finishes up at safety, but played corner earlier in his career. You know, a guy with who has demonstrated a nose for the football, certainly, at times over the course of his career. You mentioned for the BC Lions. Clearly, they like the player. We talked a little bit about them as a sort of best player kind of team. They have Jackson Finley, a young guy drafted in the second round last year, who finished the season as their starting safety after Christophe Beaulieu, who they had drafted early the year before, got injured. And so they kind of have two starting safeties already. You wonder where exactly Elad fits in, but you know, it may be as a corner. You think about this team that has at times started Patrice Rene at the Sam or nickel spot. A couple years ago, remember Adrian Green started some games at halfback. So, I mean, they're willing to let their Canadian defensive backs play the positions that they feel they're best suited to play in the Canadian Football League. So he's not going to be put in a box, and I think Elad's a guy who kind of has the versatility once he is healthy to be able to do some of that.
Yeah, 7 seasons over those 4 different schools that he was at. Like, I know NIL and transfer portal has changed everything, but he could collect a pension from the NCAA if he wants to at this point. Like, it feels like he's of age to be able to go.
Well, and they're about to change their rules, and players like that are one of the reasons for it.
Exactly, Faran. So, yeah, I mean, the interesting thing for me here is just the fit, like you say, Dwayne, because he does have a fit in this defense with this team. It does make sense. The question is where and why.
Yeah.
And when. I mean, right? Because, Faran mentioned, the injury and also the Beaulieu injury timing coming back. Is he going to be on the roster this year? You can't really practice roster a guy necessarily when you're looking at him as being a second-round draft pick. So you're hoping that Jackson Finley continues to be an absolute stud as he was last year. Christophe Beaulieu comes back into the fold, and then it becomes a question of where does he actually play in this defense? And like you say, they won't hold him back. He can play wherever he's best, but where is that? We don't know right now.
Yeah, and some of the things he did at Rutgers was close to the box, making tackles inside, so that could project him as a nickel, but it also gives you some depth to figure out, you know, Patrice Rene, we know Finley's going to be a really good player for him, but does this guy give them some flexibility at other spots?
Argos are next on the clock. Jim Barker back in the fold in Toronto, along with John Huffnagel. So much experience. Head coach Mike Miller there as well, and just a completely new look in Toronto right now as they try to rebuild that team and get back to the Grey Cup where they were just a couple of seasons ago. Of course, Chad Kelly coming back. So many places where they could go here, and with the pick, here's Stu Johnson.
With the 16th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Toronto Argonauts select Ethan John, defensive back, Windsor.
Slowly getting a run on defensive backs here in the second round, a tackle machine last season with Windsor.
Yeah, and listen, this is a very good football player, but also kind of an attitude, character kind of pick for the Toronto Argonauts. I traded notes with Jean-Paul Cercelli, the head coach at Windsor. Ethan John is not the biggest defensive back in this draft, not necessarily the fastest guy, but physical, tough, great leader, you know, like an absolutely fearless football player. Nothing but positive things said from him by his college coaches. You know, terrific teammate, all of the above, but a guy who's just been, you talk about the tackles, like a productive football player and a big part of this sort of reemergence of the Windsor Lancers football program.
This is the first really, truly surprising one to me. Like, I did not see him going this early. I'll be completely honest with you. Like, invitational combine invitee, like, good player, certainly has a role to be played in the Canadian Football League. Did I think it would be a second-round pick? When I see a laundry list of really high-caliber players that are ready and waiting and willing to be selected, I did not think that he would be going this high. I mean, Ethan Stewart, Devin Cromwell, a little bit of a different situation there with Cromwell and all the rest in his background at Michigan State. But in terms of athleticism, Ethan Stewart kind of has the upper hand, and, you know, fit and body type, and you play him at a variety of more different positions, maybe more on special teams. So, you know, this one to me is a bit of a puzzler, but they'll find a spot for him.
Yeah, and it you know, 5'9", 190 pounds, that's going to be the thing. Like, where is he going to fit in a role for the special teams? And certainly a guy probably starts out on the practice squad and then see where he is after that.
All right, the Montreal Alouettes are next up after reaching the Grey Cup game a year ago. As Marsh mentioned earlier, with Danny Machocha in charge, their Canadian content, their draft, it is all best in class. The Owls when we come back. Let's take a look at the Owls' second-round history, starting with Nate Boschman, David Dallaire as well, Radim Brown, Pio Lestage as well. So they're having some success. They've made some hay in the second round. Boschman began last year with a bit of an injury, but I think he should be a real factor for that team this coming season.
Yeah, little doubt in my mind that Nate Boschman is going to be an important player for them defensively. Again, the retirement of Marc-Antoine Dequoy opens up some snaps at that safety spot. He was a terrific special teams player for them as well, despite missing a chunk of the season due to injury. And like, they need another great Canadian special teams player on that team, right? As Richards and Gagne go 1-2 in the league in special teams tackles.
All right, the pick is in. Let's send it over to the commissioner.
Avec le 17e choix du repêchage 2026 de la LCF, les Alouettes repêchent. With the 17th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Montreal Alouettes select Shakespeare Louis, defensive back, Southeastern Louisiana.
All right, Louis from Ottawa began his college career at Robert Morris, where he played 20 games there before making the move to Southeast Louisiana. Plenty of NCAA starting experience, and a player they'll get right away after taking a future with their first pick.
Yeah, and you look at Louis, you mentioned the production over the course of his college career through a couple of different schools. Definitely a guy, maybe teams wanted to see a little bit more from him from a testing point of view at the CFL Combine. But this is a guy that, I heard multiple teams definitely talking about how they like Shakespeare Louis, liked his production, a guy who certainly looks the part, sort of mature kid ready to step in and make a contribution for a team.
He is the second player ever taken in the CFL Canadian Draft from Southeastern Louisiana after third overall 2020, Isaac Adeyemi-Berglund. So welcome to Montreal, a couple of guys that are from the same school, which is kind of fun. But to me, it's the productivity is great. It almost reminds me at a different position group when we had the conversation about Malik Straker that was going to the Saskatchewan Roughriders, right? Like undersized guy. We don't know why, but he just kind of gets it done, right? And he's continued to do that same kind of thing. And I'm looking at the fact that he is in the 27th percentile in terms of height. He does not have long arms. He does not have top-end speed. Like, there's a lot of reasons why it just shouldn't work, and he shouldn't go this high in the draft, Lapo. But he goes because people just watch the film and trust that it will translate into the Canadian Football League.
Yeah, I know, the scouts aren't going to like, 31-inch, 31.5 vertical. His broad jump wasn't really good. But goes to Robert Morris. And at Robert Morris plays very well and then is able to make the jump to a higher level program and have a lot of success. So this gives them faith enough to say, hey, what's on tape is more important than sometimes these testings.
Let's take it to Saskatchewan now for the next pick in this draft. It's the final pick of the second round. Before we get to those two bonus picks at the end of the round, the party is still going. They were happy with their first round selection, certainly still reveling in the glow of their Grey Cup victory over at the stadium right now. Let's take a look at the second round picks the last 5 years. Eric Anderson, the offensive lineman from Western, Nick Wiebe, Jackson Ford, Zach Fry, and Terrell Jana. If you're the Riders right now and what you were able to address in the first round, where do you go from here?
Yeah, it's honestly tough to say, and I'm not dodging the question. I'm not dodging. This is a draft where, what did I say to you guys in our opening block about this draft? Is it's going to be unpredictable. Yeah. So I'm not even trying to make predictions. Everybody's mock drafts have been kind of blown up here as we get into the second round of this draft. You may be getting to a point where there are a couple teams that I kind of thought may look at the futures. Saskatchewan is a team that hasn't been afraid to do that. If you think back to Kyle Hergel a couple of years ago, this was a guy who had signed an NFL contract as a free agent, undrafted free agent, and the Saskatchewan Roughriders took him third overall in the draft. So we're now looking at a pick at the end of round two, and some of the best players available, the very best players available, are still on the board.
Right.
And so I wonder if perhaps they look in that direction maybe a guy like Wesley Bailey.
Well, I'm looking at receiver. Ajo is no longer on the roster. Nate DeMontenac has already been taken off the board here earlier tonight. Jezlaomi Ochilalayo, I think he's a good fit. I thought he would be a good spot for them at the end of the first round, but then also it's like, well, Nolan Olm is still waiting here. Big body guy, can play special teams for you, right? Nick Senecal, very talented, right? Like productive player. We just talked about productivity in film being probably king over everything else. Like there is a handful of receivers I think that would be a good fit to go in this spot.
Especially if you're starting 2 to 3 possible receivers, you better have depth. We already talked about Daniel Weed being there, but you got to get somebody else to help go to the next person and give you the depth you need in case there's injuries.
With the Riders pick, here's Commissioner Stu Johnson.
With the 18th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Saskatchewan Roughriders select Dylan Jeté, wide receiver, Alabama State.
Dylan Jeté. We had some other receivers that you mentioned earlier in the board. A guy that shows a ton of athleticism, almost a 40-inch vertical, and at Alabama State, didn't necessarily get a ton of production, but at lower levels earlier in his career, he did.
Yeah, and a smaller receiver, but very athletic. Has over the course of his career made some athletic highlight reel type catches. This is a guy who didn't really get that opportunity at the combine. We talked about Nate DeMontenac sort of stepping forward, grabbing the opportunity, where he kind of became labeled as the top receiver largely because he stood out at the combine. Well, part of that was the fact that some other guys didn't necessarily participate in things at the combine. Dylan Jeté, he's a guy who has played for Team Canada at the youth level as a defensive back and as a receiver. You mentioned at Wofford before Alabama State, but he was a guy who hurt a hamstring running his 40. That led to him not getting an opportunity to kind of show what he could do at the combine and show that he belonged in the top group of receivers. But certainly some teams feeling from his film that he's a guy that's in that mix. And Saskatchewan, obviously a team that has loved their Canadian receivers.
Yeah, certainly. I just wonder in terms of the size, like, again, I mentioned Nick Senecal and Nolan Olm being there, whether or not like a bigger body might have been a better fit in that spot. And this is what you always have to remember when it comes to all these athletic accolades that we talk about. There is a direct relationship between the size, the weight, and the athleticism, right? And this is a not just a small receiver, this is a very small receiver relative to the since 2000, all the data that I have from the testing, whether it be pro days, combines, invitationals, regionals, he's in the 20th percentile for height and weight. Like, he doesn't have super long arms, he doesn't have these big massive mitts to go and catch passes. How does he compete on special teams? How does he make his way onto the roster? Daniel Weeb is a smaller guy as well that's in that depth role in Saskatchewan. So maybe they're thinking, we got some of these longer, more traditional receiver body types, and we can backfill with some of these quicker guys, mix and match. But I just wonder whether or not it's a good fit to get him on the field sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and you certainly, can you get him speed sweeps? Can you get him in a position where you just put him at one spot, let him get healthy? It is too bad you didn't get a better evaluation from him because he got hurt. But this is a guy, like you're trying to project to see how can we develop this guy by putting him in just one spot and then maybe get him some speed sweeps, stuff like that. That's what they're going to have to do with Daniel Weeb, too.
I mean, the thing that's interesting to me is you mentioned the two names of the guys coming in, Daniel Weeb, whom they drafted last year, and Dylan Jeté, who they just drafted. Those will be their two smallest Canadian receivers. And on their roster, they're looking to replace Tommy Neal and Ajo, who are their two biggest Canadian receivers. So it's, you maybe find that size in some other places. Even among their Americans, Joe Robustelli leaves for Edmonton in free agency, a bigger receiver. So it changes their look a little bit.
Right, and when you're drafting receivers, there's two areas of receivers you're drafting. You're drafting somebody who you think can play around the box. And what that means is somebody who's going to have to go block at times because you don't want to be two-back sometimes, Dwayne. You want to take the fullback out and play with five wide receivers. So when you do that, you have to have one of your slots has to be able to be physical enough to do some blocking on the inside. This is obviously not that type of player. This is the other one where you're putting him farther away from the ball, and you hope he can run with the ball. You can hope he can be a speed sweep guy, and that's what they're going to try to develop.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I'll throw in is that for the bigger receivers they've had, who's their best receiver? Sam Emelis is not a monster.
Right.
right? So, it's... you never know.
Right. Second round almost in the books. We have 2 more picks left. These are the picks, the bonus picks given to Edmonton and Winnipeg, essentially their awards for playing Canadians for the most number of snaps over the course of the season. It was a priority for Ed Hervey to get one of these. And when you saw what they did with Canadians last year, no surprise they're in position. We'll be back with the Elks bonus pick. Two more picks in round 2 of the 2026 CFL Draft. Let's send it over to the commissioner. Here's Stu Johnson.
With the 19th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Edmonton Elks select Wesley Bailey, defensive lineman, Louisville.
All right, we've seen a couple of futures go. Here's the next one, Wesley Bailey out of Louisville, who's got an undrafted free agent contract with the Rams, ranked 4th by the CFL Scouting Bureau.
Yeah, Wesley Bailey from Victor Todondo's Gridiron Academy in Ottawa, one of the great development programs, an absolute football factory in the nation's capital. But Wesley Bailey, a guy who has played a lot of football, starting his career at Rutgers. He and teammate from Rutgers, a fellow Canadian, fellow Ottawa native Rene Conga, transferred together from Rutgers to finish up their careers at Louisville. But, you know, a guy with speed and length coming off the edge, sort of your prototypical defensive end is essentially what Wesley Bailey is. I think he's a guy who's going to get a long look in the National Football League, but no surprise for Edmonton with something of a bonus pick here to use it on a future, and this is a guy who, you know, who kind of fits the bill for them.
I love the strategy. Anytime that you get these bonus picks, just taking a shot, right? Trying to see whether or not you can find one that gets through the cracks and makes its way to you. Lapo, as soon as the pick came through, you said the same thing that Dwayne just said. Might be waiting a minute on that one, right? But it's okay. It's okay if you're waiting a minute or two on it, because the reality is at this pick, being a bonus selection, rewarding you for being most willing to, you know, take those opportunities and those shots to try and put players in different positions of power. You can spend a pick like this, and there is absolutely zero stress associated with it, and there's only upside. So Wesley Bailey, heck of a player for obvious reasons. It's funny to me, honestly, that he was such a great tester. He's such a great athlete and rush off the edge. He gets overshadowed because he just happened to have a freakier teammate. It's all from the same place. It's kind of unfair to Wesley, but certainly if he makes his way to the CFL, we know it's not a question. He's going to be an impact player.
You know, and at 6'5", he's got the arm length as a defensive end to either knock offensive linemen's hands down or kind of bench press them off, and he's got the speed and quickness. Plays with a motor. It shows up on tape. Impressive player. And again, I keep talking about, we have all these guys from Rutgers. Rutgers is a pro-style defense, so he's gonna know how to play it. He'd drop into coverage, be down, be a pass rusher, go inside at times. So he'll be very flexible whenever they get him. Really athletic football.
Well, we've talked a lot about Edmonton's depth of Canadians.
Yeah,
they can afford to wait.
Mm-hmm. And when we look at those types of players, the players who might not be available, all of the players that have either signed NFL contracts or are there as undrafted free agents, who's the next to go? Right? Like, again, we've talked about Akeem Messidor being the longest of long shots, but after that, is this where the run happens, or is there another logical guy that maybe you could see falling through?
I think there's just shelves to this draft, right? Like, it's kind of like there's 3 here and it drops off and you wait, and there's going to be a couple that are taken in the 5th round, and then there's going to be a couple that are questionable to even go as the final picks in the 70th overall selections and beyond. So I just think there's a lot of layers to it at this point, right? Because there's so many guys that are getting shots.
Yeah, I was just going to say the genie's out of the bottle now, right? And you probably see the run start to happen a little bit.
With the final pick of the 2nd round in the CFL Canadian Draft, here's the commissioner.
With the 20th pick in the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers select Kevin Klein, offensive lineman, Boston College.
You called it, boys. Here's the run. He signed with the Miami Dolphins as an undrafted free agent. Father Mike was a member of Ottawa here in the CFL back in the 80s.
Yeah, dad's American, mom's Canadian. He has his Canadian citizenship, so he was a bit of a late add to the draft list, but certainly familiar with Canadians, having played on a Boston College offensive line that has included Logan Taylor, Kyle Hergel in recent years. This is a guy who started at tackle during his time at Boston College. There's a feeling that he can play a little bit of tackle, but will probably kick inside, I think, in the Canadian Football League. 6'7", surprisingly strong, right? Sometimes the taller guys, long arm guys, get on the bench and you think that they're not going to perform. He was among the top guys in this draft class on the bench press. So, you know, physically strong, a guy who, again, can contribute at a couple of positions. I think probably plays as an inside guy in the Canadian Football League if he gets here.
Yeah, height, strength, length. I mean, he checks a lot of those boxes. The thing that I love that Winnipeg is doing here, as much as, you know, we're questioning the Dante Daniels pick at 10th overall, if you look back to 2024, it's Kevin Sklercius, big, strong, physical receiver, special teams upside. Michael Chris Ike, running back from Delaware State, big, strong, physical, beat you up at the line of scrimmage. Gabe Wallace, offensive lineman, Buffalo, big, strong. You see where I'm going with this, guys? Then you get Dante Daniels at 10th, and now Kevin Klein as kind of that facilitating the pipeline growth of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. And honestly, I think this is wise because we all know the centerpiece of what they're doing is Brady Oliveira. I just listed a receiver, a running back, a tight end, now two offensive linemen.
Signed Tommy Nealdon, free agent.
Exactly, Tommy Nealdon,
big body.
Physical. So right now you can crack down inside and move linebackers with him. It's every single one of these players that they are bringing in-house, Lapo, has the ability to get people off the line of scrimmage and create room for Brady Oliveira to run free. It's pretty obvious what they're trying to create.
What I liked about Klein is obviously the biggest thing is his length and how tall he is. You have to be long to play offensive line. You got to get people and bench press them off him. I thought played physical in the run game. Tackle's got to set there's two things you got to set. Guard's got to set the depth of the pocket, and tackle set the width of the pocket. I think at times he could do a better job of setting the width of the pocket and that's just going to be just getting coached by the professionals and making sure he can not collapse the pocket. But like this is a good pick. They may have to wait a little bit, but this is a good football player.
And that wraps up the second round of our draft coverage. Let's take a look at the second round, which again has the two bonus picks. Dante Daniels, a bit of a surprise for Winnipeg at the top of the round, followed by Kevin Klein at the 20th pick at the bottom of the round. In between, Isaiah Smith, the top running back off the board. Benjamin Sangwa out of UBC going to Edmonton. Emerick Boutin, Malik Mega, Jet Ladd, Ethan John, Shakespeare Lewis, and Dylan Jeté among the other picks in this round. We're going to wrap it up on this side. You can catch the rest of the CFL Canadian Draft on TSN Plus after a few minutes for us to get reset here. So again, we've got every pick. Lots of CFL conversation. Just tune in to our online portion at CFL Plus. On behalf of everybody, thanks so much for... Oh, we're not wrapping up. We're just going to break. We will come back. We have got more to talk about when we come back. Stay here. All right, welcome back to the start of the third round of the CFL Draft. Again, the bulk of this draft we're going to pick up on TSN Plus. Carter Kettle, the receiver from Alberta, gets taken with the 21st pick by Edmonton. He gets to stay home. The kid from Grand Prairie who played his college ball at the U of A. Louis-Philippe Gauthier, the defensive back, goes to Toronto with the 22nd pick. The Argos with 5 of the first 23 picks in the draft. And I got to tell you, all of us are still reeling from that second round. There were a lot of surprises. Overall, I think there was a lot to like in the first round, and we may come back here next year and talk about how good the second round was and how crazy we all were. But what's your take on just the round, but the draft generally?
Yeah, well, I'm just going back to pat myself on the back for what I said at the start of the show, that this draft is going to be unpredictable. And I will tell you that the second round was even more unpredictable than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I am a little bit stunned by a few of the picks. Again, hope that everybody that got taken where they did has success, all the rest, but didn't see a lot of those coming. That's the beauty of the CFL Draft, is just that anybody can go anywhere because all these teams have different thoughts and needs and wants. So that's my main takeaway from the first couple of rounds that we've had here. But also I need to acknowledge Dwayne Ford in his 20th Canadian Football League draft coverage. Since 2007, he's been nailing it down.
Yeah.
My man, D. Ford.
I kind of liked Ottawa, what they did, take the best offensive lineman to start, and then they get somebody they think could be a fullback in their organization for a long time. 2 solid picks to start the draft for them.
They're not bringing you back.
I'm okay with that.
Okay, the dream's dead.
I'm good. Thank you.
All right, that is it for the televised portion of the 2026 CFL Canadian Draft. We will be back on TSN Plus for the rest of the picks, all 74 until the end of round 8. Again, the CFL training camp start in 12 days. Stick around for SportsCenter. Thanks for logging on for the final 5 rounds of the Canadian Football League Canadian Draft. As the third round, this is rapid fire. Dwayne Ford, Paul LaPolice, Marshall Ferguson, as we bring you all the picks. And again, 74 picks as we go here in the third round. Starting with Carter Kettle, the receiver taking the 21st pick. Top of the third round by the hometown Edmonton Elks. We've got Louis-Philippe Gauthier and Darius McKenzie going back-to-back to Toronto. Charles Bouliam going to Winnipeg. Devin Cromwell to Hamilton. I want to say Jesu Layomi Ojutalayo just because I've practiced it so many times. So I had to say the receiver going to Calgary. They got back-to-back picks. Tristan Merwa from Colorado, the defensive end, with the 27th pick. Nathan Udo out of Manitoba goes to Montreal at 28, and Darius Bell, the offensive lineman, goes to Saskatchewan with the 29th pick. And let's start with Carter Kettle, because this is a guy that has had a really, really successful Canada West career. And one of the things he told us when we met with him, that his coach at the time, Chris Morris, who's now, of course, with the Edmonton Elks, said, if you aren't at this point in your career, meaning battling for a spot in the CFL, you've done yourself an injustice. He thought so much of this young man.
Yeah, and obviously Carter Kettle produced. This is a guy who's one of the more polished receivers coming out of a Canadian school. You know, very mature attitude. We had the chance to sit down and talk to Carter a little.
Mom is a huge CFL fan.
Yes, she
likes
is.
Kenny Lawler.
And, you know, probably just became an even bigger CFL fan now that her son is playing in it. But, yeah, a hometown pick. You know, his current coach, Stevenson Bone, spoke very highly of him, as did Chris Morris, about how special a player this guy has been for U of A.
In terms of receiver as well, like Colby Herford last year went to Edmonton 58th overall, and you start going back through the history of it, and it's like, it's been a while since they've drafted a receiver with any sort of prominence, right? So for them to go after him, I mean, yes, admittedly, they did have a couple of picks that were stacked relatively close together. They get decent value. The fit is good. Organizationally, it makes a lot of sense. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those picks that is a bit of a sleeper. It feels like, yeah, okay, that's a nice story, gets to stay home, but we might be looking back at this in 3-4 years and going, he's in the top 10 of Canadian receivers kind of thing, right? If he finds a good spot in that offense, and especially keep in mind the transition at some point likely coming, Cody Fajardo to Taylor Powell. If you have a developmental receiver, who's he getting throws with right now? Who's the second quarterback, right? So over time, we'll see how that develops.
Here's what I love about Carter Kettle. Like, he's a track guy who plays football, and he's a very good football player, but like, this is an 11-3 100-meter dash. He's a 55-second 400-meter dash. He's got speed. And the thing, when we interviewed him, I thought he was really impressive. He talked about, I'm already thinking about how I'm going to set up. We played this team 2 weeks ago. I ran the post on him. I'm going to figure out how I'm going to show the same thing and then run the post corner. This kid lives and breathes football. I think he's going to have a good career in the CFL. Reminds me a little bit of Rob Bagg from Saskatchewan, former Queens player. I think he's going to be a good one for the Elks.
I want to get into Darius McKenzie. From South Alabama, who goes 23rd to the Argos. And when we broke down the linebackers in this draft, there was a top 3. He was part of the top 3. Bit of an ankle injury, so he didn't really get to test, but he should be ready around training camp. What allowed him to fall here into the third round?
Well, I think part of it is probably the injury piece for some people, and the fact that they didn't really get to see him in person. Early in his career, didn't play a ton, started off at Maine before transferring to South Alabama. You know, so I think that there's a little bit of that piece with Darius McKenzie. But yeah, certainly a guy who is seen as a top 3 linebacker, maybe teams that weren't necessarily looking for guys to play linebacker and thinking in terms of guys playing special teams. But, you know, I think also you look at the group, like we saw Eric Rasco go in the first round of this draft. We saw Daryl Jabome go in the first round of this draft. You know, a little bit of a gap for the linebackers, right?
Yep.
Like, as we've said all along, like that, the second round was very unpredictable. And I think it became unpredictable for the teams, right? I think even if the teams were doing projections, they probably would have projected that Darius McKenzie would go earlier. But when some different things started happening, and it created runs on different types of players, whether it was creating runs on the fullbacks, tight ends that you wouldn't have thought would go that early, or creating runs on the futures that you maybe didn't think would go on that spot. Runs on a couple of DBs that, we didn't expect to go quite that early. I think circumstances having nothing to do with Darius McKenzie contributed to Darius McKenzie falling as well.
So let's get to the fourth round real quick here, just because these picks are going in rapid fire, and we're going to get back to some of these other players in the third round. Nolan Ulm, the receiver from Eastern Washington University, a CFL factory with names like Vernon Adams and Bo Levi Mitchell and Matt Nichols and others that have played there. He goes to Toronto. Many people expected him to go maybe in the second round or much higher in the third round. Charlie Parks, clearly the number 2 defensive lineman in this group, goes in the fourth round, 31st to Ottawa. Spencer Walsh at offensive line goes to Edmonton. Ethan Stewart, defensive back to Winnipeg. Braden Zeman, the offensive lineman, goes to Hamilton. And Justin Pace, the linebacker, goes to Edmonton. Let's go back to the third round for a moment. And another player I want to ask you guys about, and Marshall, I know you'll be interested in this guy because he's going to your hometown in Hamilton, and that's Devin Cromwell.
Yeah.
And played at Michigan State. Now, a little something about Devin Cromwell. Here's his numbers. A 40.5-inch vertical, 11.3 in the broad jump. Among safeties at the NFL Combine, he would have placed first in the broad jump. He would have tied for first in the bench press with 18 reps of 225 and ranked third in the vertical. On his pro day, he actually tore his meniscus on a 42-inch vertical jump and had to have surgery, so isn't going to be available until probably mid-season. Athletically, this guy's a freak, but didn't necessarily play a ton at Michigan State, at least not as a starter extensively. So what's the ceiling on him once he's healthy?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's got tremendous explosion if he gets healthy. It's wild to me that he ended up doing his broad jump as well with that meniscus injury, because I'll warm it up and I'll jump through it, and then still lays down a broad jump better than I could ever do times 10 on my greatest day of all time. Like his knee isn't working properly. So the athleticism is there, the burst is there, the range is there. Again, the thing I keep coming back to as I watch these picks roll in, and, not to spoil or jump ahead on any of them, but there's some picks here in the third and the fourth round that I thought 100% were going to be second-round picks.
Yes.
Most of the people that were taken in the second round, I thought 100% were going to be in the third and the fourth round. Like, this is just a complete upside-down flop, and it almost feels like the second round went completely off the rails, and then the third, everybody went, whoa, all those guys got taken. Let's settle in here and understand, let's get back to the running order and our big boards or our prominent needs and all the rest. But it's very strange how it's shaken out, because, I mean, he's the type of player that we're talking about in Cromwell that should have been a second-round pick.
And here's what I would say, the interesting thing how college football has changed, where guys are transferring out and going to multiple schools. Devin Cromwell starts at Guelph, Texas Tech, goes up. What if he spent every year at Guelph and then had those testing numbers and had 4 years of film? Yeah. It's interesting. I know they have to go up to play at the highest level and get, whether it be NIL money or things, but it's very interesting. You got to adjust to a new scheme, new people, all that stuff. If he's a 4-year starter at Guelph, what would have happened to him with those type of numbers? I think he's first, second-round pick. Right? It's interesting.
Another guy I want to talk about is at the top of the fourth round, Nolan Ulm, the receiver from Eastern Washington. Yep. And, I thought he might be a fit for BC in the second round. And you want to talk about character guys, this guy is that. Lapo, you talked about guys that moved around. Nolan Ulm is not that. He had opportunities to leave Eastern Washington. He stayed. The last 2 years have been a little up and down for him, just from an injury standpoint, quarterback injuries, system fits, things like that. You will not meet a more committed athlete, a more mature kid, absolutely shredded. What's his CFL projection, Lapo?
Well, it was funny you said he doesn't move around. No, he didn't move around colleges, but what he does on his film, he moves around in every spot on their offense. So part of your evaluation as a coach is you're watching, do they just put this player at one position and then just play him there? Or is this guy smart enough to move inside, outside, different areas and be one of the smarter guys? That's what shows up on his tape. I think he had some quarterback issues, with his team that hurt his productivity. They went through a bunch of quarterbacks, but this guy's a smart football player. I expect him to pick up a CFL system very well. His 40 times wasn't as good as you want, but give him a waggle and let him go play. A lot of productive guys don't have the best 40, but this guy, I think, is a smart football player in a system that is kind of spread out, throw the football all over the place.
Which, by the way, as we're talking about Nolan Ullman, he goes at the top of the 4th round. In between him and Devin Cromwell that we mentioned is Jesse Laimoe-Ojutolao that we talked about, receiver, big body, chiseled, special teamer. Somehow,
Love that guy.
Somehow, Calgary just goes and gets a guy that probably should have been somewhere in the middle teens. They get him at 26. Tristan Marois has some downsides to his game, but in terms of rush ends after him, there's not a whole lot there. Nathan Udo ends up going to Montreal.
They needed a receiver.
At 28th overall, they needed a receiver. He's the most big-body, well-rounded skill set that exists in this draft. Darius Bell, that we thought might be a first-round pick at the start of this thing from Hamilton, goes to Saskatchewan at 29th. Like, this is what I'm saying. Like, all these picks in the mid to late 20s and even into that Nolan Ullman pick. Crazy.
Here's a look at the rest of the 4th round. We mentioned Justin Pace. Pierre Kameni, the defensive back, goes to the BC Lions. Liam Talbot, the running back, goes to Montreal. Osasere Odamuingi, the linebacker, another name I've been practicing. From the University of Calgary, goes to Saskatchewan. And a guy that was just a dominant Canada West player. Before we leave the Nolan Ullman story, I just got to say this, his coach, Aaron Best, who people around the CFL know well because he's been a guest coach at a number of CFL camps. He talked about just Nolan's seriousness and his commitment. And he says sometimes, he said, I had to tell him, Aaron's a big old O-lineman. He said, I had to tell him, once a month, I want you to eat like me. And I want you to leave the weight room at least once a month, and I want you to go get a girlfriend. And so I think he did all of those things. And, the story on him truly is that he was honored for his efforts off the field in 2005. He was named to the American Football Coaches Association Good Works team. He raised over $22,000 for single mothers, runs a football camp every summer in Kelowna called Make It Happen. Quality young man. The Lions Community Relations Department, the Argos Community Relations Department is going to just be delighted to have this guy in the building. And good for him. I hope he does well. He also played in the inaugural CFC game.
Yes.
Let's get to the 5th round, as again, this thing is going quick. Have we got a 5th round pick yet? No pick yet in the 5th round.
It's not going that quick.
But it is interesting to your point, Marshall, that the 2nd round was so off the board that there is so much value in the remaining rounds of this draft.
I don't know whether to call it like the sidewalk ice cream draft, where the cone is accidentally on top because it fell out of your kid's hand, or the lava lamp draft.
5-second rule.
Because everything is going up that's supposed to be going down and coming down that's supposed to be going up, but it's totally on its head, right? So I'm like, after Nolan Ullman here, Charlie Parks, I'm extremely happy for him because he went through some injuries.
Came back from a serious back injury.
Had to earn his way back as well through the Invitational. But to see him go through that, Spencer Walsh, talented offensive lineman out of Laurier goes. Ethan Stewart, talked about him, thought he might have been like a fringe 2nd round pick. One of the best shuttles and 3 cones, big, thick kid from Oakville, Ontario, ends up going to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. So yeah, there's a ton of value.
Dwayne, I want to talk to you about Charlie Parks, and I bring his name up because this is a thin defensive line class.
Yes.
And, we saw Newer Guatkuth go where he did, and then after that, it's a bit of a wasteland because of the number of players that are going to be in the NFL, right? But in terms of available day one players, it's been thin. Where does Charlie Parks fit among that group?
Yeah, I think Charlie Parks is kind of in the right spot, so to speak. Right, I personally probably had him ahead of Tristan Marois among my defensive ends. Yep. Charlie Parks was the top defensive lineman in Canada West last year, top lineman, after having missed the previous season. But productive guy. But yeah, like we talked a little bit about the defensive tackle position, right? And you have Rene Conga, who was seen as the top guy. He goes to the NFL. A couple of guys, Kevin Jobity Jr., Trevor Bowlers, TJ Bowlers. These are guys who could have gotten their citizenship, would have been relatively high picks in this draft at defensive tackle, don't have their citizenship yet, so they are not a part of this, off the board. A name that has been thrown around a little bit as, again, one of those enigmatic guys, Tarek Polius, University of Regina, currently facing drug trafficking-related charges. Obviously, his future uncertain at best. These are guys who all would have been top picks at defensive tackle and all out of the mix. So if you want to go defensive line to add somebody to your rotation early in the draft, Amari Notice is a guy who appeared in the top 20, but I think underwhelmed at the combine, et cetera. And, and with his pro day that lowered his stock. And so if you want to go with somebody on defensive line, you're not looking at interior guys. You're looking at edge guys. And as I say, Charlie Parks would have been one of the stronger of those guys in my estimation.
Yeah, and at 230 pounds, he's going to have to be an outside guy. Like, can he turn into, let's go to a former University of Saskatchewan 5th-round pick, Riley Pickett, who, now has kind of moved positions at the BC Lions and now is a athlete who was a really good college football player, but now he's found a role as a fullback / special.
He's the new David Mackey in BC.
Can I highlight a couple of quick ones here, Farhan, just because in the middle of the 4th round, it's just catching up on me here. Braden Seasman is offensive lineman center from the University of Calgary. For him to go to Hamilton screams to me Kolinkowski potential succession plan moving down the line as a true center, because he was the best center available at the Combine. Yeah. And in that same vein, Justin Pace from Queens, linebacker, goes to Edmonton after they've invested in linebacker at the start of this draft. I love when teams do this. So shout out to Ed Hervey and Mark Killam and the whole staff there, because you end up getting the top end talent and then backfilling. But again, at 35 to get Justin Pace, he probably should have been somewhere in the early 20s.
Yeah.
That's where I.
Well, you talk about Mark Killam. This guy's going to be a really good special teams player, right? And I think that's where he projects as much as linebacker, but an impact special teams guy. I think he's going to fit in that system, no doubt.
Yeah, I mean, a guy who not a freak tester, but if you like football, you like Justin Pace's film. Even if he's wearing that crazy yellow Queens uniform.
Hey, 4-year starter, 42 games, 232 tackles during that time, 2-time OUA All-Star. That's a lot of tackles.
Yeah, he can play.
Workmanlike effort, and very similar, I would say, as well to what we saw with Nicholas Henning going 2nd overall to the Toronto Argonauts. I was kind of joking when we were talking out in the hallway before the draft show started here, where I'm like, the Queens guys are always so Queens. Like, they're just like deep thinkers and philosophical about everything, and I got that sense from Justin Pace.
These guys are so
well,
Queens.
It's just there's the way that
this is OUA talk. I can't figure any of it.
No, but it's the Queens guys are philosophical in their approach to the game of football typically. I think that's why Queens and Western hate each other so much, Dwayne, is because Western just wants to smack you in the face, and Queens wants to have a deep conversation about the smacking in the face.
Let's take a look at some of the picks in the 5th round here. We're talking about smacks in the face. Our producer, Jamie Rydell, is wondering what is happening. I thought Dustin Nielsen was in my ear. Alassane Diouf, the offensive lineman from the University of Montreal, is going to Ottawa. Frank Verdenhill, offensive lineman from McMaster, going to Toronto. Benjamin Dobson, out of Calgary, the linebacker, going to Ottawa. Another linebacker here, Brody Clark from York, going to Winnipeg. Again, guys that project to special teams players. These 3 linebackers here, Loic Gagne from Concordia, going to Hamilton. And then we've got another receiver off the board, Matt Sibley, going to the Calgary Stampeders as they continue to add at that position.
Matt Sibley looked really good at the Combine.
Matt Sibley fan.
Right?
Yeah.
And, did a lot of good things, could get in and out of breaks, caught the ball well, everything. He is undersized, right? And that's why he's sitting down here. But, he's a productive player. Put him in one spot, give him an opportunity. Well, okay, you got to be in the right place at the right time, move in and out of spots. But he was productive at the Combine. He's just a smaller guy.
Yeah, well, we've had a pretty good run on guys from this school. Ryan Sheehan, Ryan texted me a little earlier.
Oh my goodness, we're selling.
Texted me a little bit earlier about my purple Western tie. I told Ryan I'd have a little something for him. This is part of my collection. I do have a Calgary Dinos hoodie in my extensive hoodie collection. So the Dinos, good run. Braden Zeman, Osasori Odemwingie, Ben Dobson, now Matt Sibley. So shout out to the Dinos.
What's
Ryan Sheehan over the course of his career?
Former Western head coach Greg Marshall. Coach Greg Marshall is now going, what is happening right now? I retired.
No, the Western guys, listen, I was just at Western for a big dinner on Friday.
Okay.
They know where my loyalty lies, but, I have parts to the collection.
I'm just curious what the going rate is for the other 26 U Sports schools to get a 30-second advertisement.
Well, I will tell you guys, I have a University of Saskatchewan hoodie, Saskatchewan football. Scott
your daughter runs track at Guelph.
I do have Guelph in the collection. Yes, I have Acadia in the collection. I've got those covered. But anybody else, listen, I'm a double XL and you know where to find me.
Can we go back to Matt Sibley's board and talk about Matt Sibley?
I love Matt Sibley.
His numbers from year one, over 1,000 yards. This is productivity you want. And again, I don't know if he ends up doing anything in the special teams world, but this is a guy who competes and tells you, like, all right, if we get an injury, he's going to step in. Gives me a little bit of depth in Calgary after they've lost a couple of receivers. Obviously, the NFL, Alfred and a couple of years, their first-round draft pick a couple of years ago was retired, and then you got Clark Barnes. Cole Tucker retired, and Clark Barnes took over for him. So I like the Sibley pick, but it just gives them more depth and somebody that I think they're going to trust within their system.
Yeah. Here's a real interesting pick. Nick Senecal out of the University of Hawaii has just been picked in the 5th round by the BC Lions, a player that we thought was going to get taken much earlier. The second receiver the Lions have taken, with Nate DeMontenac being taken by them earlier in this draft. And I'm surprised, even with the craziness of the 2nd round, that he fell to the 5th round.
I'm just interested in the fact that BC must feel very comfortable in their line of scrimmage because they've gone 2 DBs and 2 receivers. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's just it's different than the other teams.
You're starting Canadians at other spots
right.
as well, right? They've been a team, obviously a Canadian quarterback, but a team that has started 2 Canadian receivers. So you're, even with 2 linemen, you're at 5 Canadian starters on offense.
That 2 could go to 1 in a hurry, the way they're setting up offensively. Yeah. Like Nate DeMontenac could push to be a 3rd Canadian starter for the Lions this season. And if that happens, they only have to play 1 offensive lineman. It'll be Michael Couture. Like if that's the way things go right now.
Yeah, Let's talk about Nate Senecal. Like the interesting thing, his pro day wasn't great at Hawaii. So he runs, I think, a 4.8. And then he comes to the Canadian Football League. He says, I'm going to go to the combine.
Yeah,
I'm going to
wasn't
run.
Initially going to attend.
And then he attended because he wanted to run again, and he ran a 4.72. And I think a good lesson for a lot of guys is you are what you are. If you're a 4.7 guy, you're a 4.7 guy. Embrace what you are. There's been a lot of guys in this league who've performed well at 4.7. Yeah. I think he's, his film's good. Like, you just got to make sure you give him opportunities, maybe whether it be a waggle or whatever. But this is a good pick this late in the round. He had good hips in and out of breaks. I thought he made some explosive catches downfield. You'd love him to be faster, but he's going to be a competing slot.
Yeah, well, and the thing to me, Lapo, too, is, I know the you are what you are was kind of the common comment at the combine after he ran in the 4.7s, but the way they did the receiver 40s was a little messed up, right? Like,
which is being corrected as well.
Usually, usually at the combine, and yes, they did recognize this and will fix it going forward. But usually at the combine, you get 2 position groups on the field at a time.
Yeah.
And basically, they go through the circuit of testing, but they run their 40s first. This year, they put all the groups on the field and worked through a circuit, so everybody was kind of at a station. Well, what group ran last?
Yeah.
The receivers, right? So guys who are usually running fresh, and the guys whose 40 times we probably care most about were the guys whose 40 times were probably the most skewed by the way the testing went down. So, that might have changed his 40 time a little bit, but we're talking about a guy in, a Division I football program at the University of Hawaii, battled injuries in his senior year, but he is their leading receiver. The year before, right? Nick Senecal can play. Yeah. And I will say, there are a handful of NCAA players in this class that I've seen play in person. Nick Senecal is one of them. Yeah. He can play.
44 career games, 102 receptions. The guy's shown production at a high level, Lapo.
And then Chris Getzlaff, Andy Fantuz, Keandre Smith, who's balling out for Hamilton. Those guys all didn't test great, but great players in the league. So, just put them on, educate them in the
Philpotts ran slower than everybody wanted to.
Right.
We'll talk about Rene Conga at the top of the 5th round, or the top of the 6th round, I should say, in a moment. But before we leave round 5, I want to talk about the last pick in that round. Jez Janvier, the Southern Miss offensive lineman out of Montreal, 6'5", 314. In the fall scouting bureau, he was ranked 14th and then fell out. Didn't necessarily play a ton at Southern Miss this past year, but he's got the experience in earlier years at a level like that. What do you see there? Is there something more that he's going to be able to provide?
Monster frame, very inconsistent at the combine.
Yes.
Huge upside. The reps that were bad were real bad. The reps that were great were amazing. That's the whole thing for me, is that he needs to find, whether it be through fundamentals, coaching, some level of consistency in order to stick on a CFL roster. Offensive line, getting this type of value for that kind of body with that kind of upside, it's a really good value pick if it turns out. But it's on Jez in order to get his feet in the right place, have his head up, not to lunge at people and all the things that we saw at the combine.
All right, let's look at Rene Conga at the top of the 6th round. As he has been selected by Ottawa, so a hometown pick for them. A player that's going to be in the NFL for a little bit here. Got a fairly hefty signing bonus to be an undrafted free agent. What are the chances this guy winds up coming north at any point?
Well, when you say at any point, I think that there is a reasonable chance, right? He's an undrafted guy, but certainly a reasonable commitment made to him, right? Close to $300,000 guaranteed, a significant amount for an undrafted free agent. You know, but Rene Conga is a guy that we thought might get a UDFA look, and then his pro day happened, right? And 290 pounds, and this guy runs in the 4.7s and broad jumps 10 feet, which, you know, a lot of receivers would have been happy with his his numbers, right? Guys 100 pounds lighter would have been happy with those numbers. So, you know, I think people in the NFL are going to be willing to invest a little bit of time in attempting to develop this guy.
And you're sitting there as a general manager and saying, hey, listen, we're in this round here, this talent's here from our hometown. Like, let's use the pick right here, because eventually he'll want to come home and play for his hometown, just like they did last week with Luigi Villain. So that's why you do that at this spot, and you say, hey, listen, I like what we've already taken. Here's the time to take this player. There's a value for him in the 5th round, and the upside is huge. And again, you're not doing this if you're BC. You're doing this at Ottawa because he's a hometown guy.
I think people might have thought I was joking when we were on the TV side for the first couple of rounds of the draft about Ottawa trying to stack a ridiculous amount of homegrown talent. Why would you not? Honestly,
yeah,
why
it's
would,
a hotbed.
Can you imagine what TD Place would look like for an Ottawa Red Blacks team that's, you know, whatever, 10-2 or 13-3 or something like that, where you have 6 starters on defense that all played down the road?
Yeah.
Like, how ridiculous would that building be if you were to fill that place up with all, because that place has been, since it's been back in the CFL, through the ups and the downs, you know this, Lapo, it's a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
Because people want a winner so damn bad because they know what Ottawa football can feel like when they have a winner. And I just feel like with the amount of talent, like as I'm going through the boards and putting together prep for this draft, I'm going Ottawa, 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 Ottawa.
Just historic.
And most of it is on defense.
Yeah.
Because they're freaky athletes. I'm like, just draft them all whenever you get the opportunity. Hope they all show up. And if you draft enough of them, maybe they all get together and say, why don't we all go home at the same time?
Yeah, and you get a lot of guys who played in CAFA, and they played, you know, so all these other football organizations that, like, my son plays, and he's like, they're seeing, oh my God, that guy played for the Bell Warriors. That guy played for Cornwall. Like, it's interesting being able to see like how this talent has moved on. And it just shows so great for Ottawa.
Was it Darius McKenzie that had the line to you guys that he said of the Cumberland Panthers organization that he played like U10 type football, 15 guys from that team went D1?
Yeah.
It's like, it's kind of crazy. Yeah, like we're doing interviews at the CFL Combine, and you know, one of the funny moments to me was watching as Darius McKenzie's coming into the room as Christian Vea is leaving, and they didn't say anything to each other. And you know, we get into the interview, and I start talking to Darius McKenzie about Gridiron Academy and football in Ottawa, and he's like, "Yeah, Christian, he was my quarterback for 10 years or something like that," right? But they were so nervous at the Combine, they didn't want to say anything to each other in front of everybody. But yeah,
awesome.
It was
amazing.
Yeah.
A lot of talent there. We talked about the impact of the Ottawa region and Victor Todondo's Gridiron Academy and obviously the Football North program in Mississauga and the number of players that they've produced. So, you know, we know that football is being developed at a high level in certain parts of the country, and certainly the youth sports programs are better than they've ever been. As we get into the 6th round, let's pop those up. I know we took a quick look at them. Let's go through the names here in round 6. And as we know, the picks are flying fast. I think they're down to 3 minutes a pick now.
Yeah, for sure. I was just going to hop in as we recap this 6th round board. there were a couple of selections that I think are super smart and very under the radar. Leon Talbot from Windsor, the running back, going to Montreal after Sean Thomas Erlington, says he's all done. Like, that's a really smart, good depth pick from a guy that's going to be a grinder and play on special teams pretty quickly. And the other one that grabbed my attention coming in here was, again, Benjamin Dobson from the University of Calgary at linebacker.
Scrapper.
Canadian linebacker, Ottawa. They're committing to it, and they're getting the right type of people, mentality, and bodies to make it work. So I like that pick at 41st overall to get Benjamin Dobson.
Talk to me about Tariq Quayson
Tariq Quayson.
Quayson, I should say, the wide receiver that the Argos just picked.
Yeah, spent 1 year at University of Windsor after transferring from Wilfrid Laurier. A two-sport athlete.
Yeah, track as well.
Yeah, terrific track guy. Didn't play a lot at Laurier. They were obviously deep at receiver, where Ethan Jordan has led the country in receiving the last 3 years. By the way, Ottawa draft pick, he's re-signed with them. But goes to Windsor. And one of the things that Coach Cercelli at Windsor talked about with him was, obviously his great athleticism and so on, and working on consistency, but just the fact that he fit in seamlessly, right? A guy coming into a team as a senior, but he kind of became part of the family very, very instantly. So another, call it character type pick for the Toronto Argonauts, and obviously a guy who has some explosive athleticism to boot.
Can I vent a little bit here?
Of course.
Can I vent a little
Please.
bit? Like, so as we get to these later rounds and we have guys that, will be drafted and get opportunities, I want to talk about one team, like the Calgary Stampeders. I wrote these guys' names down. Like last year, at the end of the draft, 8th round pick, Ashton Miller-Melicon, four-year star, Queen's University, OUA All-Star 4 seasons, okay? Matt Stokeman, 7th round offensive lineman from Manitoba, and All-Canadian. And this one guy, Max von Muhlendorfer. Where is he from?
You know where he's from.
Where's he? I do. He's from Western, right? 7th round pick. He was a testing freak at the Combine last year. So all three of those football players went back to school. We're trying to develop these good young football players, but guess what happens? This year, they count. And that started 1 season ago. These players that go back to school now count against the roster.
And just to explain that, teams have roster limits during training camp in terms of how many guys they can have. So you can't just bring 200 guys into camp and hoard the players.
Right. So going forward, draft picks don't count. But the CFL used to say, hey, listen, if a guy got drafted, went back to school, we're going to say he doesn't count. We're going to But the letter of the law is in your draft year, it says in the collective bargaining agreement, that draft year is the only time you don't count. So I'm not sure if this is a CFLPA thing. That's what I thought. The CFLPA is making the letter of the law be the letter of the law. Well, now you've got these guys who now need to be developed, and it may not be for the team that drafted you. It could be somebody else, and they're off the board because they get cut because they're now counters. I just think it's short-sighted. Just think about, like, you bring in rookies, 3 days later, you've got to cut 15 rookies. And now those guys count. What if you're an offensive lineman and you get 1 day in pads? So I think the league's got to kind of look at what they're doing for their training camp, because I would love to see those 3 Canadian players get more time to be developed, and I'd love to see more time, because I'm sure the American scouts are saying, we can't move on from these players we've had on our neg list for 2.5 years, and then give them 1 practice with pads on and say, oh, thanks, as they're trying to learn the game. So I just wish we would get more opportunities for these Canadian later round draft picks that go back to school.
Yeah, and the one thing that I will sort of tack onto that, and I could go into a whole extended rant, but I'll try not to, but basically player development, and particularly Canadian player development, needs to become more of a priority. And I have said to many people, I was drafted into this league 35 years ago. At the age of 5. And one of the things that has changed the most since that time to me about kind of the draft process and young Canadian guys coming into the league is there was far more of a commitment. And there are things about the model that make it tough for teams to do it. So I'm not ragging on the teams, I'm kind of ragging on the model here, that the model needs to be fixed. And we can talk another time about the reasons why.
But this could happen. Eventually, you could be drafting guys at the end of these rounds, because you go, all right, I need more wideouts in camp so I can run practice, and these guys are non-counters. Even though there might be an offensive or a defensive lineman that's better, but they don't have the spots for that guy. So that's not the right model. We got to get an opportunity to take the best players in the later round picks and figure that out, find a better way.
A couple of offensive linemen that got taken late in round 6. You've got Mitchell Schlesinger from Guelph, who goes to Calgary. Ethan Graham out of the University of Regina goes to BC. And then Albert Reese, the fourth, winds up being taken with the last pick in the 6th round and goes to Saskatchewan. Another player that, really had a very good senior season, and then his pro day really helped him, and his testing measurables all really stood out. So he got an opportunity in the NFL with the Carolina Panthers as a meaningful signing bonus as well. If he plays in the CFL, he's a guy that's going to play tackle.
Yeah.
Like, he'll get that opportunity to come in here and do that. Do we ever see him?
Well, it's interesting that he fell this far, right? And it makes you think that the CFL teams believe that he's going to get a long look down there. And, we'll see what happens. You got to bear in mind, he goes undrafted this year, but this is a guy who in a year earlier won the Kent Hall Trophy, which goes to the top linemen at any of the Mississippi schools, any of the Mississippi colleges, right? And he was the guy that won that award a year ago. So, in terms of resume, in terms of performance, maybe a little bit of a dip this year, but when you look at the body of work, Albert Reese is a pretty impressive dude.
And this is a massive human, right?
Yes.
And he was the 37th ranked tackle.
Prospect game as well.
Another prospect game guy.
The original game.
This is a huge, long-arm guy who, if he extends his hands, it's all over for a defensive lineman because of the length of his arms. And that's what you need as an offensive. Can you get in front of somebody and extend your hands? And it's over when he has this type of length and the size. Now, when you're that big, you're going to give up. He's not overly athletic. He's kind of a plotter a little bit, but they just don't build him this big, and and if he can get in front of you, he remind me a little bit about probably this guy was a little bit better athlete. Remind me of Matt O'Donnell, former CFL football player, but just a massive human. I think that's a great get later in the draft.
22 starts in the SEC. In fact, at one point in week 2 this year, he was named the SEC lineman of the week, and his dad played defensive line in the CFL with Edmonton in the early part of this century. Meanwhile, Aloha Latandres Regimbald, either a receiver or a quarterback.
Or both.
Or both, at any given day. This guy is an athlete. And I know he gets taken by Edmonton, so people are going to say, okay, well, didn't work out with Trey Ford, a quarterback in Edmonton. This is an entirely different player, skill set, 6'3". He dropped into receiver in the drills at the combine without practicing it and looked like he'd been doing it his entire life.
I think he caught a touchdown pass on the first route he ran as a receiver in Skelly or one-on-ones.
But honestly, he's a guy that has rushed for over 2,000 yards at the U Sports level. He's got the opportunity to go back. He's had a different offensive coordinator virtually every season.
Literally every season.
He certainly does have to develop more as a passer, but the passing skills are there if the reading ability maybe isn't yet, or the consistency or the footwork, given all that he's been through. So, Lapo, can he play quarterback? If you were a head coach, is an athlete like that worth the development time at quarterback?
So, first of all, for me, I want quarterbacks to have the ability to run. So, yes, that would be somebody you're saying, hey, let's take a chance on this guy. And then the first thing you're trying to do is, can this person be my third string player? Put him in situations where he's our wedge guy, and then I'm going to build a package of a number of football plays that I keep him in after we've gotten the first down, and then run a couple of plays. Like you guys said, he had almost 1,000 yards rushing. And so this is a guy that could be a nightmare for defenses. You run 2 or 3 plays after he does his quarterback sneak. This is a good pick for you. You can also send him back. But I think this is a great athlete you want to take the chance on. And you think about it. Hamilton last year took Quincy Vaughn, right, to do this similar type of thing. This is a much better athlete who could transfer to other spots.
If I were to, just speak athletically about Aloha, because he is so special athletically, like the length that he has, his stride length, his reach, his catch radius as a receiver, his ability to drop it in over the top because he's got these long arms with a higher release, like all of this stuff is incredible. But the pure numbers on it is he has the second best combine workout score that I have for quarterbacks over the last 25 years. Only Trey Ford was better. He's the second best athlete, pure athlete, at quarterback to be in that spot. But then I look at, okay, well, there's a lot of small quarterbacks that can test very well. If I take his workout and then I plug it in and compare it to the size that he has, Christian Vayu and this year, Aloha Latondres Regenbald, are the only two that are in the top 15 I have for quarterbacks all time, which means this is a very, very special athletic and large quarterback group that is now led by Aloha. The only player, by the way, that's in that top 15, right on the edge of it, Brad Sinopoli, which when we're talking about...
Which is the obvious comparison.
Let's compare the two, because you played with Brad. No, you actually are way older than that. Sorry, Brad. Sorry, Brad.
I was calling college games when Brad was playing.
I didn't mean to offend you. But a guy that made the transition, and people who just look, athletes have evolved since Brad played, since you played. So people will. It's easy to look. Come on, they have. It's easy to look at Eloa and say he's a better athlete than Brad was at this stage. Is he?
He is.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He is a more fluid athlete, I think, in terms of making the transition to receiver. I think he's a more natural athlete. But a couple of things come to mind for me in terms of the comparison. One of the things that's overlooked, like Eloa has always played quarterback. Mm-hmm. He played quarterback his entire college career. Brad Sinopoli in his college career spent a year as a starting receiver because Josh Sakobi was a veteran quarterback, and they knew they had an athlete that they needed to get on the field. So Brad had been the backup quarterback his first year. His second year, he goes and starts at receiver because they want to get him on the field. And then he starts his last couple of years. So he had a little bit of experience as a receiver before he arrives in the Canadian Football League. You know, the other piece that for me is a little different is, you know, I want to see Aloha Latondres Regenbald get an opportunity to reach his full potential, to really see what he can be as a quarterback. And as Farhan said, like, in 4 years at McGill, 4 different offensive coordinators. So he's constantly learning a different scheme, like never gets a chance to go back, play in the same offense and kind of have that continuation from 1 year to the next.
Yeah.
I'd like to see somebody give him a chance let's max out what he can be as a quarterback before we commit to the position change.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah.
Now with the draft,
especially so many people, you know, like so many people want somebody to be that third quarterback, do the quarterback sneak, build it, give him a couple of passes, give him some things he can do. And I thought he threw well at the combine, guys. I really did. When he was doing some of his throwing and in some pass skeleton session, I thought he threw well.
Texting with Ed Hervey right now and just asking him where they see him. Certainly, Ed's words, everything is on the table. They expect him to go back to McGill this year. And while they, I think deep down, see him as a long-term receiver, only because that might be a faster path for him on the field and as a short yardage quarterback, if he does have a great year and shows that type of development as a quarterback, he says everything's on the table.
And an interesting thing, last year, who did they take later round pick? Jackson Tuchinski. Quarterback, tried to move him to receiver.
And the interesting note for me is that, like, when Brad Sinopoli in 2018 had those 116 catches, that was the new Canadian all-time record for a single season. I remember going back through, looking at the target chart on Sinopoli and going, I mean, they're all underneath 12 yards, right? So we talk about length and speed and all the athleticism. What it really comes down to, if Aloha does end up being a receiver, is when you're running a shallow crossing route, can you recognize that the outside linebacker's bailing and settle? Like, do you have the smarts to be able to understand? Because the whole thing for Brad was he had the quarterback brain at receiver.
Saw the game.
And so he was running a crossing route. And he's like, I don't have to care about all 24 people that are on the field right now. I just have to know that what that one guy's doing and sit down in the right spot. If Aloha can do that, plus his athleticism, and catch some passes, he can absolutely do it.
Correct me if I'm wrong. He's beaten Laval, is he not?
He had a big win in the last couple of years, whether it was Laval or Montreal. I
think it was Laval.
The tip of my tongue.
Yeah, I might have to go back and look.
I do remember watching an early McGill game with him as a young kid at McGill, and Dwayne, you tapped me on the shoulder, and you're just like, that kid's a freak.
Yeah.
Like he's been known for a very, very long time. Yes. It's a good spot for him to go to Edmonton, because if Ed Hervey and Mark Killam are going to give him the door open and see what happens, that's fantastic. I mean, their succession plan is kind of already in place in terms of actual quarterback, but it's a great spot for him to land and learn and see what he can be as a football player.
Well, and when you talk about conversions as well, I always like to give this stat. Brad Sinopoli gets drafted in 2011, right? 4 receivers go in the first round in 2011. That's, in recent memory, the most receivers we've seen in the first round. the leading career receiver from the class of 2011 is Brad Sinopoli, right? Now, I just want to change gears on a quick thing as we, have seen some of the players picked in the last couple of rounds. A couple of kickers go. Michael Horvat from McMaster University, terrific punter, arguably the best punter in the country. Nathan Walker from York University. Canadian football lost kind of an unsung hero in Ken Urquhart, known to probably every kicker in southern and southwestern Ontario that he touched their careers, known as Coach Kick. Helped out with a lot of university kickers, high school kickers, basically the most successful kickers. Has been kind of Liram Hiralahu, personal coach with the Argos the last couple of seasons.
Mark Leggio working with him as well.
A number of guys. Like basically, when I say every kicker in southern and southwestern Ontario, Ken has touched those careers. We lost Ken in March, but nice to see his legacy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll mention as well that my lasting memory, and it was so sad to hear about Ken passing away earlier this year, was he came up to me at the OUA Football Awards that I was hosting, and Michael Horvat is there for McMaster and winning every award that exists. And he just kind of tapped me on the arm. He's like, he just started rifling off stats. He's like, his hang time is like 4.2.
That would be Ken.
Right? And he's like, come on, like what does he got to do to get a shot? He goes, listen, his punting average is better than all the guys in the CFL. What does he have to? What does he have to do to get a shot? And I was like, listen, man, I'm not the one making the picks. I'm like, I get it. He's a very good player, but it's amazing to see the legacy of Coach Kick roll forward in the athletes. What I think is going to be really amazing about this, think about how many people Ken was able to impact with all of his coaching in Southwestern Ontario. All of those kickers are going to take his knowledge and pass it down to every other young kicker that comes in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. His legacy is going to be felt for generations because of the number of people that he worked with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's take a look at the rest of the 7th round. We saw a couple of defensive linemen getting taken there, including Amari Notice, NCAA player who had a chance to meet at the Combine. He goes 61st overall to Hamilton, along with Stephen Kapaye going to Calgary, a defensive lineman as well. Let's talk about Notice, because he was a player that was also in the CFL Scouting Bureau top 20 rankings at one point earlier and kind of dropped a little bit, and maybe what led to that happening and whether there's still an upside there.
Yeah, I think there is an upside there. I mean, there's a reason why Amari Notice has had a successful NCAA career, a Division I career at a couple of different schools. Idaho is where he started off, finished up at Coastal Carolina as a starting defensive tackle. I do feel like teams shied away from Amari Notice a little bit after his pro day numbers, and I would say his combine testing. I feel like teams were a little disappointed. And so you'd maybe like to see a little bit more twitch from a defensive lineman, et cetera, a little more power. But I mean, this is a guy who knows how to play football, a guy who came through the Football North program as well. But we talk about the development, and, I mean, one of my big things is development is not linear, right? Like, guys develop at different paces at different times in their careers. And, so for Amari Notice, yeah, he's a guy I still think that there is a chance there, but I also understand why he slipped in this draft.
Am I right in saying, like, a couple of picks before that, the first St. Mary's player taken with Joshua Jack?
Yeah.
A bigger guy.
Last year, the AUS was completely shut out in this draft, so good to see that change.
And Steve Samar's done a very good job in that program, turned it around quickly. This kid competed to block on tape and physical, just needs to learn the game, learns how to become a pure route runner, just it has a lot of things, but like a bigger guy, like you talked about, the bigger guy that Winnipeg takes, can he be? He's physical on film. Can he be one of those interior blocking guys they're looking for? So it's good to see a St. Mary's guy taken.
Yeah. All right, 7th round officially in the books. We're going to get to round 8, which is just getting started right now. Let's take a look at what's happened there. Josh Connors, a linebacker, goes to Ottawa. Weeby Mombo, the running back, going to Toronto. What is he? Sebastian Parasalidis, fullback, and another kicker, Brady Lidster.
Another Coach Kick guy, by the way.
Another Coach Kick guy.
Excellent.
Yeah, all
going
Canadian
to Winnipeg.
kicker.
And there's a need there. In 2 years, we're going to see an entirely different need for kickers because the goalposts are going to the back of the end zone.
Yeah.
So What's that going to do? Is it going to create a little more focus on accuracy, or is it going to just obviously have to create a little more focus on length? It does change exponentially once that rule comes into place in 2027.
And it's a little bit of everything, but it changes the kicking game drastically. Like as was mentioned to me, in this draft process, you think about kickoffs, right? Like you're taking 10 yards out of the middle of the field, that you want to make sure you're backing people up because the field is shorter, right? Like, offensively. So, leg strength on kickoffs is going to matter, but, it completely changes what is and isn't within field goal range, et cetera. Like, with the changes to the field of play, I think the kicking game is kind of the thing that's most affected.
Yeah, absolutely. Lister is a massive leg for a U Sports kicker. Like for his ability to be able to pound it through from like in around 50 very consistently, I think he's got a great opportunity to make a difference at some point. Again, obviously the global draft has changed the whole dynamic of special teams with the amount of Aussie punters and all the rest that we're seeing have an impact on these things. But I'm looking forward to seeing some of these linebackers that are starting to come off. Like Josh Connors is a really interesting one, Dwayne, that I see in your eyes that you're like, I'm about this guy. But Kyler Lang is an undersized, doesn't have the greatest testing numbers, all the rest. But again, like we've been talking about with some of these defenders, it's like active, high energy, and at a CFL Combine this year with the pads on where there were a lot of people sitting out and taking a day and had a tweak here and a tweak there. Kyler Lang was, I am here to earn a job. And he just
he can get after a little bit.
But Josh Connors is a great one that I love seeing. And Sebastian Parcelidis as well. When I talk about being at OUA Football Awards and people winning absolutely everything, that guy holds down the OUA spot when it comes to fullback as a first-team All-Star year over year over year because his film is arguably the most fun of any player in the entire draft.
Thank you.
And Marshall, you just made a really good point of there are a lot of guys at the CFL Combine this year that were on the sideline watching plays, not doing things. We have to kind of look at that from a league because at one point, you and I were sitting there watching the team period, and there's only 4 defensive linemen. And there's 6 defensive linemen in sweats watching it. Because
one of the defensive linemen was playing O-line the day before.
So, you just basically brought a lot of these guys who aren't really practicing for you, plus you have a lot of the guys who come up and don't want to test. And then you add in, okay, we're going to do team, we're going to do some other things. Well, you take away from evaluation of drills because you have to do walkthroughs, you have to do some individual just so you can run your plays, and you maybe get a little less evaluation, and then the guys don't practice because they get hurt early. So, there has to be something to figure this out to do a better job because sometimes a lot of the guys who are running the drills, they don't even get drafted because everyone else is sitting out. So I think that's something that the league's got to look at from a combine perspective. Dwayne, what do you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the model has to change. And I understand why it has evolved in the direction that it has as, quite frankly, I think it begins with the fact that you have more Canadians playing NCAA football, and NCAA guys have pro days, right? So those guys who have sort of done their max testing within a few days or a couple of weeks of the combine don't necessarily want to test again.
Of course.
And I think in combination with that, as the level of the game, the level of the prospects coming out of college has improved, I think you have more guys that maybe have NFL opportunities on their mind and don't want to risk injury in participating in the drills.
Yes, absolutely.
For me, I struggle with it because a football combine is a job interview, plain and simple, right? It's a job interview. It's an audition for a job. And it's an audition for a job in which your willingness to go out and compete physically is kind of a huge qualification.
Well, there's also, I don't want to say a stigma, but there's also a feeling that if you're an NCAA player, you're going to get elevated in the eyes of scouts from CFL teams.
That's an outdated mindset, though. But I know what
But
you're
it also
saying.
comes from agents. And so there's that if you come here and you test and you don't test as well, your stock's going to drop for no reason.
Yeah.
And then you've got to deal with the waggle and all of that kind of stuff that you might not have had as much practice at. And if you don't look as good doing that, your stock's only going to drop. So these players are not making these decisions in a vacuum to not test. They're being advised to not test.
But can I be the old man amongst us for just a moment?
I thought I was the old man.
I would welcome that.
Okay,
Yes.
because I've thought a lot about this over the last month and a half, 2 months since we got back from the CFL Combine. Football by nature is a sport based on competition. I think NIL, transfer portal, I don't like it here. I can go wherever I want. I don't like this situation. I'm angry at my coach. I'll sit out a year. I'll still get drafted. Whatever that mindset is that has evolved over the last 10, 15 years, you can even do post-COVID if you want. I don't care.
That's when it happened.
This is an unrecognizable landscape in terms of we're trying to track down film from 6 schools over 7 years and getting film on this and that, and then the testing metrics, but that guy tested here but not there because he didn't want to look bad in front of that person or this person. If you're in the Grey Cup and you have a helmet and shoulder pads on, it doesn't matter who's across from you, you are competing. Like, I wish that there was a little bit more of that, of people just saying, like, agents or otherwise going, it doesn't matter if you're going to run a 4.7 and you want to be a 4.5 guy, run, do the interviews, jump. Like, put your pads on.
Yeah.
Play football. We're here to play football. You're here to be evaluated for football, so do football.
The Devin Cromwell situation is going to have every agent saying, see?
Right. And then there's some guys who would have helped their stock by doing receiver drills, catching the ball, all those things, so they get advised. And it's just like, you hear the coaches say, I would have liked to seen this guy do more instead of just do an interview because they don't do enough.
It might be time, though, for the league to also, like, they evolved about 5 years ago to add the team portion.
Yes.
Might be time to just get rid of that, right? And you can still do skilly, so you can see quarterbacks make reads, right? And see how defenders play in man or zone, because when all you do is one-on-ones, it tends to be a press man factory, and that's not really how...
Those guys aren't playing those positions either.
Correct.
Right.
So there is some value to that, but if you could eliminate the team periods and maybe shorten the entire thing, you might get a little more buy-in. It might be time to take a step back as far as the league and coaches are concerned, and the football ops side, to maybe get a little bit more back the other way.
Yeah.
There you have it. 8th round, we're done. We've solved every problem in the league's done. 8th round is in the books. Let's take a look at the last couple of picks. Ryan Spate, goes to fullback to Saskatchewan. And that's it. We don't call the Mr. Irrelevant here. Ryan's going to make the team.
Well, Ryan's coming off, I believe, knee surgery.
I know, yeah.
But yeah, one of 3 Wilfrid Laurier guys drafted in the last round.
Did we get a Western guy drafted?
I was wondering that as we were running through the tally.
Did we get a Western guy?
Anyway, it's time to go.
Hey, you might need a different tie next year. That's going to happen.
Perhaps.
Let's wrap this thing up. We've talked a little bit about the second round and how we were all kind of lifting our jaws up off the floor. But other than that, just your overall thoughts on this draft and the amount of value that got spread out throughout it.
Yeah, I think I won't say that it played out exactly as I thought, but in terms of a theme, it did, which was unpredictability. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that you had a lot of players at a lot of different positions that were kind of close to each other in terms of their evaluations. And it contributed to that unpredictability. And that is the thing that I'm going to take away from this draft. Like, there were guys that went in the second round that you might have thought would go in the 5th or 6th round. There were guys that went in the late rounds that you thought might have gone in the, between the 2nd and the 4th round. And I'm going to sit down at the end of this thing and look, and there will be guys who didn't get drafted that I'm kind of going, how did that guy not get drafted? Right? But that's the nature of the draft, and it's kind of like parity among teams in the season, like that closeness of good prospects, I think, is a positive thing.
Yeah. For me, there were some real head scratchers, as we said early on in this draft, like at second round, leaking into the third.
That was kind of the twilight zone.
It was very, very strange. But once things got settled down, I think teams got some great value. I really do. Like, that's where I'm looking. And it might have been because everybody decided to go off of what I was expecting in that second round, but there were some great picks in the 3rd and the 4th round. And I think I think we will look back at this CFL draft in 5 years and we will say there are more players that had better careers, longer careers, more impactful careers that were taken in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds than the ones who were taken in the 2nd round, which is very strange to say.
I guess I just want to, I think I'm pretty proud of, God, like the Gridiron Academy, right? And Football North having like just so many good players and the exposure, and more than anything, the growth, hearing all these players say, I saw Mesidor, I saw Christian Valou, I saw Michael O'Connor, that's why I went to the Gridiron Academy.
Yeah.
So just seeing how they can promote the game and promote opportunities for players in Canada, I thought that was really cool about this draft. I think I'm going to send my son to the Gridiron Academy in Ottawa next year. We'll go do 11th grade there, do some of that stuff. But that's what I thought was awesome about this draft, and seeing, pretty proud of how successful all these players have been from Canada.
For me, let's just get to May 10th. May 9th, prospects report, or everybody reports, I should say, and then May 10th we get on the field and get things going. We're 12 days away from CFL training camps. Amazing. So thanks to everybody who helped us prepare for this. Listen, Cody Wiles is a young guy. Everybody should follow him. He's one of our researchers here on the CFL side, and did a real good job with his draft guide. I want to thank the folks at 3 Down Nation. They provided some great content, stories. John Hodge and JC Abbott, you guys do great work. I know you're doing your own version of the draft. Your studio's not nice as ours. And on behalf of the 2 bald guys at Marshall, Dwayne, Lapo, Coach, Marsh, thanks so much for doing this. We enjoy it. And to our producer, Jamie Rydell, this is his last one. He's too focused on Masters. He doesn't want to do this anymore. Thank you so much to everybody. The Canadian Football League on TSN.
You sports coaches,
just
thank you.
a couple of weeks away.
Thank you very much.